taking over Greenland. And that is, at this moment, completely unaligned. But what we see there, and it describes the whole relationship between these two groups, Europe and the United States, is that the Europeans understand that they are very weak militarily, that they are utterly dependent on the United States for their defense, the American nuclear umbrella, to protect them against the raging Russian bear, whom they have been antagonizing, poking in the eye at every opportunity for the last several years. So this relationship is, Europeans are supplicants. They are not equal partners to the United States. And the curious thing is that their latest threats, if Mr. Trump proceeds with, shall we call it, a military takeover of Greenland, is that the European countries would pull out of NATO. I would like to just introduce to your listeners an alternative reading of this. There is nothing that could make Mr. Trump happier than if the European leaders pulled out of NATO, because it is no big secret that Mr. Trump does not like NATO, does not like the EU. So this relationship is very complicated. It is being exposed in major media only in a very partial way. Yes. And it deserves much more attention. I'm very happy that you are directing attention to it.
Thank you for highlighting that. And Dr. Doctorow, you know, so why there's this huge gap between how Trump sees Europe and how predecessors of Trump, or you know, the previous U.S. governments saw Europe?
It is completely a different understanding of the world order and how it should be. And we saw that a little more than a month ago when Mr. Trump presented his new national security strategy document, which upended U.S. foreign policy priorities that had been in place since the creation of NATO in 1949. He is talking about a foreign policy that is very muscular, that is based on might makes right, that has no pretense about furthering democracy, about human values and so forth, but is about America's core material interests and furthering America's control or hegemony, at least in the Western Hemisphere, and to a certain extent, farther afield. One of his priorities is the destruction of BRICS. His predecessors talked about how BRICS was a threat, a multipolar world was against the interests of the United States, but they were not prepared to do anything. He is prepared to do it, and we see that in the tariffs he's imposed on India, on China, on Brazil.
Very enlightening. Thank you very much, Dr. Doctorow, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to our next news, U.S. President Donald Trump has slammed Republican senators who voted to curb his military powers. In a Truth Social post, he has stated that Republicans who have supported Democrats in curbing his powers should be ashamed. This comes as the U.S. Senate voted on January 8th to advance a war powers resolution that would bar Trump from taking further military action against Venezuela without congressional approval. The motion moved forward on a 52-47 vote, with every Democrat and 5 Republicans supporting the measure. Lawmakers say the action signals growing concern in Congress about unilateral military operations coming days after a U.S. raid in Caracas resulted in the capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro and sparked debate over executive authority. The resolution must still pass both chambers and could face a presidential veto, making its final outcome uncertain. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Dr. Gilbert Doctorow. He joins us from Brussels. Thank you very much, Dr. Doctorow, for staying with us. You know, as you were highlighting, there's a very huge difference in understanding of how Trump sees Europe, and then how Trump sees, or the other leaders saw Europe. And now, do you think there's a big gap in understanding of how U.S. or Trump sees the U.S. domestic politics as well?
Well, the underlying principle of of Trump's actions is might makes right. And in that respect, the consequences of carrying out this principle are not so different from what predecessors have done, but the justification for it, the explanation for it, is entirely different. When you speak about the kidnapping of Maduro in Venezuela, you have to have a little bit of memory. A similar action was taken by the United States in 1989 by then President Bush when he invaded and captured the leader of Panama, Noriega, who was taken to American prisons where he lived out the rest of his life. So I say in a practical matter, what Mr. Trump has done is not so very different from what some of his predecessors have done, but the explanation to the public and to the world at large is entirely different. It is no fairy tale. It is saying that we can do it and we will do it. And he puts the world on notice. So that is a very big difference.
And lastly, what are the broader implications for U.S. foreign policy if Congress asserts more control over military decisions, especially in light of recent unilateral actions in Venezuela?
Well, I didn't quite answer your first question, and going into what you've now just asked, I have to emphasize that it is a wonderful thing that the Congress has remembered, the Senate has remembered, that its constitutional responsibility is to vet, to approve or disapprove of American foreign policy initiatives. In that respect, I believe this was Senator Ron Paul, who was Rand Paul, who was responsible for this latest vote in the Senate. And it is an important action reminding us that there is a Congress, that it is supposed to be, constitutionally required to be, a check on presidential powers. So that is all to the good. Of course, the horse is out of the bone already. As regards Venezuela, President Trump himself has forsworn further military action. So it is giving him a warning for actions that he does not intend to take anyway. Nonetheless, it is very good that Congress has awakened from its long slumber, and we'll see how this impacts on further military adventures that the Trump administration may be planning, and most in the nearest horizon, what he would do to capture Greenland.
With that, I would like to thank Dr. Gilbert Doctorow for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move the focus on to United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has expressed regret over President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw the United States from multiple international organizations. UN spokesperson Stephen Dujarric has said that Guterres emphasized that the organizations will continue to carry out its mandates for those who depend on it. Meanwhile, the UN climate chief Simone Steele warned that the U.S. exit from a global climate treaty would be a colossal own goal, harming the country's economy, jobs, and living standards. Steele has said that the decision could leave the United States less secure and less prosperous. Let's listen in.
Secretary General regrets the announcement by the White House regarding the United States' decision to withdraw from a number of United Nations entities. As we have consistently said and underscored, assess contributions to the United Nations regular budget and the peacekeeping budget as approved by the General Assembly are legal obligations under the United Nations Charter for every member state, including the United States. All United Nations entities will go on with the implementation of their mandates as given to us by member states. The United Nations has a responsibility to deliver for all those who depend on us, and we will continue to carry out our mandates with determination.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Rohan Gunratna. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now,
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, looking at this, what do you think, what will be the immediate and also long-term effect of U.S. pulling out like this from many international organizations, not just UN's.
Asuma, what we are seeing is US
Yes.
is withdrawing not only from international organizations, but also conventions and treaties. The
Yes.
US says is contrary to the interests of the United States. This is going to have a major impact because US withdrawing from those organizations will mean lack of resources for those organizations, because the US is a very powerful and a very rich country. So for instance, some of the organizations that they will withdraw would be the 24/7 Carbon-Free Energy Compact, the Colombo Plan Council, the Commission for Environmental Cooperation, Education Cannot Wait, European Center for Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. So if you look at the quality of those organizations, they have played a very important role in influencing and in shaping global peace, global stability, global cooperation and collaboration and partnership. So I think that it's going to have a very major impact. And if you look at the UN agencies, it is withdrawing. It will be the UN Democracy Fund, the UN Energy, the UN Entity for Gender Equality and Empowerment of Women, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UN Human Settlements Program, UN Oceans, UN Population Fund. So I believe that it's going to have a major impact on global safety, global security, and also the capacity of governments to work together and to build a stable and a peaceful world.
Right. Thank you for highlighting that. And I hope not, but do you think that there could be a chance that other countries might follow the suit?
I think other countries will step up and provide more assistance. I don't think they will want to retreat. I think, for instance, the Australians, the New Zealand, Canada, UK, and continental Europe, these countries will provide more assistance and support for the multilateral organizations because they understand the value of working together, working in partnership. Trump is moving more towards isolation and building US power, US capabilities rather than global power and multilateral power.
Building on that, Professor, what do you think US's goal is here? What do you think Trump is trying to prove here by pulling, US out of all these places and causing this rippling effect?
Trump wants to save taxpayers' money. Trump wants to advance US interests, not global interests. Trump believes that some of these organizations are working contrary to US interests. And that is his point of view.
Right. And what do you think, don't you think he thinks that US interest and global interest has some kind of alignment, or there could be some similarities in them, right?
In cases where there is compatibility, then he will support those organizations. But in other institutions, he will withdraw. That is his policy and plan. Anyway, this will be only for a period of 2 years. So during that 2 years, governments will have to be more patient. Leaders will have to be more patient. But also there's something else. They can have a discussion and a dialogue with him and speak to him and tell him what is important for global stability and global peace. Whether he listens or not, I think the European leaders, especially who are close to him, should go and meet with him and have a conversation.
Right. Do you think that these organizations will try to kind of change their maybe policies to be more aligned with him so that he doesn't pull out or get some funds from US? Do you think they will do that?
I think they should, because they should try to accommodate the wish of the United States to some extent at least. But what is important is to keep the US engaged, because if US pulls out of these organizations, it will be a big blow. It's like Trump pulled out of the USAID, the United States organization that provides so much of assistance and aid, developmental assistance to Asia, Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. It is a very big blow to those people living in poverty, those people living with health issues. So I think that what is important is to remain engaged in this day and age.
Thank you very much, Professor Gunratna, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on to our next news. Syria's defense ministry has declared a ceasefire in 3 neighborhoods of the northern city of Aleppo, a move that could halt fresh fighting between government troops and Kurdish fighters. The deadly standoff between Damascus and Kurdish authorities, who have resisted integrating into the central government, is a major challenge for Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa, who has pledged to unite the country after 14 years of civil war. Meanwhile, Tom Barak, Washington's special envoy to Syria, issued an urgent appeal to the Syrian government and Kurdish fighters to halt their fighting in Aleppo. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Rohan Gunratna. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, how might Kurdish authorities leverage in this situation, or can they?
Asma, what we have seen is that there are 4 minority communities in Syria. There are the Shiites, what you call the Alawites, the Druze, the Christians, and the Kurds. All these communities have suffered under the rule of Ahmad al-Sharaa, known as Abu Muhammad al-Jolani. So instead of putting military pressure on those ethnic and religious communities to unite with the Sunni population of Syria, he should create autonomous regions. He should not intervene in those regions. If he does that, there will be no peace in Syria. So if he's a wise man, he will not try to impose especially Sharia law or Islamic law, because people are tired of Sharia law. Wherever Islamic law has been put in force, there has been a lot of instability and violence, whether it is in Afghanistan or whether it is in Iran. And what is important is to have secular law so that those communities, those constituencies will also work with the Sunni community. So for there to be long-lasting peace, it is important for Ahmad al-Sharaa, the new president, the new leader of Syria, to understand the sentiment of those communities that also suffered during the previous regime. And he must have that far-reaching vision to work together with all communities.
100%, very important. Thank you for highlighting that. And lastly, what role can U.S. play? Like we saw Tom Barak issue a warning, I think, about this.
U.S. has a very special relationship with the Kurds, because ultimately to defeat ISIS, the terrorist group called the Islamic State, in 2019 in the Euphrates River, the main fighting formation was the Kurds. So the Kurds, every country, every community should be indebted to the Kurds, because if not for their fighting capabilities and skills, the monstrous terrorist group called the Islamic State would still be in power and conducting attacks and killing people and maiming people, injuring people. So I think that the Kurds should be protected, the Alawites should be protected, the Christians should be protected, and the Druze should be protected. And this can only be done if the United States and European countries send a very clear message to Ahmad al-Shara, do not go to areas where those communities live and try to force them to integrate, but to keep them as autonomous regions.
Great. With that, I would like to thank Professor Rohan Gunratna for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. Authorities in Australia's Victoria are battling catastrophic bushfires as an intense heat wave grips on the region. 3 people are missing after fires tore through homes in bushland. Firefighters are contending with 30 active blazes, with winds and temperatures up to 46 degrees Celsius, making many fires undefendable. The largest fire near Longwood has burned more than 35,000 hectares, destroying homes in a community center and telephone exchange near Valva. Another fire has consumed around 20,000 hectares of bushland and a pine plantation, but no homes so far. Victoria's Premier calls today one of the most dangerous fire days in years. Emergency crews continue to search for the missing adults and child in Longwood. Now we move on to our tech news. Google is rolling out new Gemini-powered tools in Gmail aimed at making emails easier to manage and search. The updates include AI overviews, Help Me Write, and AI Inbox, all powered by Gemini 3, starting with users in the US and English, with expansions to other languages and regions planned. AI overviews can summarize long email threads, highlight key points, and allow users to ask questions directly to their inbox using natural language. Summaries are free for all, while questions asking requires paid Google AI subscription. Help Me Write offers smart drafting, improved replies, and a proofread tool that checks grammar, tone, and style. Basic features are free, with advanced proofread available to paid users. AI Inbox prioritizes important messages and tasks, pushing less relevant emails into the background based on contacts, relationships, and time-sensitive information, while maintaining their user privacy. Google says the rollout is gradual, with some features available to limited testers and full access coming in the coming months. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump says Washington could oversee Venezuela and control its oil revenue for years. Trump also appears to soften rhetoric on Colombia, inviting its leftist president to Washington and backing away from threats of military action. Protests erupt in Minneapolis after a US immigration agent fatally shoots a 37-year-old woman during an encounter with immigration and customs enforcement officers. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says Good tried to use her vehicle as a weapon, while video footage leaves key details of the incident disputed. Israel says Lebanon's steps to disarm Hezbollah are encouraging but far from sufficient after the Lebanese army completes a first phase. The office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the ceasefire requires full disarmament and accuses Hezbollah of rearming. The Israeli military says it strikes a rocket launch strike near Gaza City after detecting a failed launch that did not enter Israel. Israel accuses Hamas of ceasefire violations and says it will not move to the next stage of the truce until the final Israeli hostage remains are returned. Russia says any foreign troops deployed in Ukraine will be considered legitimate military targets. Moscow says the warning follows a Paris summit where Kyiv's allies agree on key security guarantees. Russian strikes overnight leave more than 1 million people without water or heating in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region. Restoration Minister Oleksiy Kuleba says repairs are underway to restore heat and water supplies. Saudi Arabia accuses the United Arab Emirates of smuggling Yemeni separatist leader al-Zubaydi out of Yemen and flying him to Abu Dhabi. The UAE offers no immediate response as tensions rise over its backing of the Southern Transitional Council. Australia announces a royal commission into the mass shooting that killed 15 people at Bondi Beach. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says the federal inquiry aims to promote unity and help the country heal. We start this hour on Europe's Eastern Front, and Moscow has described Ukraine and its European allies as an axis of war, rejecting plans to deploy a European peacekeeping force in Ukraine. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova has called the proposals dangerous and destructive, saying that they are far from anything Russia could accept to end the conflict. Moscow has warned that the presence of any foreign troops in Ukraine would be considered a legitimate military target for the Russian armed forces. This marks Russia's first public response since Kyiv's allies agreed to key security guarantees for Ukraine at a summit in Paris just a couple of days ago. Zakharova stressed that these warnings have been repeatedly issued at the highest levels and remain valid. Joining us now is Ambassador Mukherjee. She joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Of course, it was a significant meeting just a couple of days ago in Paris where over 27 heads of state, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, met to discuss what would happen after that day comes when the conflict ends. However, security guarantees and European troops on the ground are off the table for Moscow. Do you see this perspective budging from the Kremlin?
Not at all, Thomas. Thank you for having me on your show. Normally, when there is a ceasefire and a termination of hostilities, peacekeeping forces that are deployed, their nationality has to be acceptable to both sides. In other words, if Russia wants to deploy peacekeeping forces along the line of actual control, they would have to be acceptable to Ukraine. And the same would be true for peacekeeping forces deployed on the Ukrainian side of the line of control. They would have to be acceptable to Russia. This is not a problem. This has been worked out in the past. In fact, India is a country that is largely acceptable to most countries as in peacekeeping operations. We actually, I think, have been in the maximum number of peacekeeping operations. In this kind of situation, if you put a peacekeeper that is not acceptable to the other side, then he is a legitimate target, as the Russians have said, and that would put the life of the peacekeeping forces who are there to keep the peace and not become sitting ducks. That would put them in great danger. And similarly, the same would be true for any peacekeeping forces on the Russian side of the border or the line of control, actual control. If they're not acceptable to Zelensky. The impression that I had got in earlier discussions, this was before the abduction of Maduro and the dramatic developments in Venezuela. I had got the impression that they were, both sides were moving towards a kind of acceptable nationalities, if I can put it that way, for peacekeeping forces on both sides of the border. In other words, countries that are regarded as, if not neutral, impartial, with experience in peacekeeping and understanding the rules of the game. And there is also a clear distinction, Thomas, I want to tell you, between a peacekeeping operation and a peace enforcement operation. A peace enforcement operation, peacekeepers have the right to shoot to keep the peace. In a peacekeeping operation, if it's under the UN Security Council, where they are called the blue helmets, etc., they don't.
Yes. Ambassador Mukherjee, I'm just going to interrupt you there. Of course, the Kremlin has labelled the European partners here who attended Paris an axis of war. Of course, is that title appropriate from the Kremlin?
Well, it's up to the Kremlin to decide how they want to describe them. Axis of war in Russian, from a Russian perspective, means that instead of trying to bring hostilities to an end, the Kremlin is saying that those who are supporting Zelensky in this manner and putting strategic assets on the ground at a time when a peace deal is being actively worked out between President Trump and President Putin, is giving the impression to the Kremlin that they are trying to increase hostilities instead of decreasing, even though they know that the Ukraine has lost a lot of territory and continuing the war is bringing great suffering and pain to the Ukrainian people, half of whose population have left Ukraine, and so many young Ukrainians have been slaughtered in this war. So if they use strong language, I think it is probably to say that it is not helpful in bringing about either a ceasefire or an actual peacekeeping arrangement. I'm not talking about reconciliation, because I think a process of reconciliation after the manner in which this war has been conducted would take decades for the wounds to heal. But even from the point of view of a ceasefire and peacekeeping, yes, I agree that the kind of language that was used in the Paris conference and the kind of strategic assets that were promised, whether they will actually come through or not is another issue, would naturally be regarded as a provocative act by the Kremlin, which is in the process of negotiating a negotiated ceasefire and eventual peace with the American president. So that is what I would have. Very strong.
Ambassador Mukherjee, do stay with us as we move on to our next update, and we move over to West Asia. And Israel's military has said that it has carried out a targeted strike on a rocket launch site near Gaza after identifying a failed launch. This comes as questions mount over when the next phase of the Gaza ceasefire will begin. The military said the projectile did not cross into Israeli territory and that the launch site was shortly struck after the attempt was detected. Following this, Israel has accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire twice in the past 24 hours. Israel is awaiting the handover of the final body due under the current stage of the truce. The country is in fact emphasizing that it will not move on to the next phase of the ceasefire until Hamas returns the remains of the last Israeli hostage still held in Gaza. Israel is also yet to open the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, which is another condition of the US-backed plan, saying it will only do so once the remains are returned. Despite the ceasefire, Israel has continued to carry out airstrikes and targeted operations across Gaza. Meanwhile, here's how people in Gaza have described the latest strikes in the city. Let's take a listen in.
في عندنا نازحين والبيت ملان سكان وأطفال ونساء. فجأة لقيت الحجار بتطير علينا والردم ونار بتخش علينا في البيت انخبطنا في راسنا وصار في إصابات في البيت وكذا من غير لا سابق إنذار ولا اتفاجأنا باللي صار. يعني احنا صراحة في منطقة خضراء وفي هدنة وفي كذا، مأمنين قاعدين في بيتنا وكلنا نازحين وكلنا مدنيين وكلنا ما إلنا أي علاقة في المكان في أي شيء. لا
كنا نايمين اللي هو صار انفجار. انتوا بتقولوا مصنفة، يعني كيف يصير فيها هذا الكلام؟ مش فاهم أنا. يعني الناس آمنين ونايمين ينفزعوا من نومهم ويقوموا، هذا إشي ما بتصوره العقل. يعني أنا اللي استشفيته إنه ما فيش منطقة آمنة.
Along with Ambassador Mukherjee, Dan Perry joins us in this discussion. He is a world affairs analyst and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. What more can you tell us, Dan, about the latest developments that have occurred in the past 24 hours? Israel has accused Hamas of 2 violations of the ceasefire over the past day.
Well, the details are as you've reported. What I can add is the context where essentially this is part of a bigger picture where Hamas has refused to disarm. You talk about moving on in the second phase of the agreement. That second phase depends on Hamas disarming. Israel only agreed to the end of the war in exchange for that. And of course, there are other points that have to happen. And, you know, one could say that Israel itself isn't implementing the other stages, which would include an opening of the Rafah crossing and a withdrawal from the rest of Gaza, which is largely unpopulated, but which Israel still controls, half the strip. And of course, reforms in a PA in the beginning of a process, the Palestinian Authority, and the beginning of a process that might lead to talks on Palestinian independence and many fine things. But everything is predicated on Hamas disarming. And I fear that the Trump administration has slightly taken their eye off the ball, because if that doesn't happen, if Hamas doesn't disarm, then nothing will follow. And critically for the Palestinians, that includes reconstruction of Gaza. I do not know any third party that is willing to put money into Gaza for reconstruction when Hamas is running the place and obviously is going to build more tunnels and, you know, use it to smuggle weapons and by via drone or however, and to rearm and to consolidate control via patronage over the people of Gaza. It's a true tragedy for the Palestinians that Hamas is holding on and seems to think that it might have gotten away with this. I think the U.S. needs to make clear to relevant players in the Arab world, like especially Qatar, Turkey, and to a degree Egypt, that they simply have to have a come to Jesus or Muhammad moment with Hamas and explain that at least in Gaza they must hand over their weapons. As for Israel, Israel needs to get out of its own way and understand that the coming future government of Gaza will involve the Palestinian Authority. The current government in Israel is unable to handle that for internal political reasons, but with any luck, they'll be replaced in a coming election.
Dan, just staying with you, the stages of the phases of the ceasefire deal, the disarmament of Hamas is part of phase 2 of the ceasefire deal. Of course, what hasn't been fulfilled by Hamas is the return of the final body. Is Israel legally or politically justified in freezing the next phase over the return of one final batch of remains?
I mean, the agreement doesn't really have the force of law, so this isn't really about legality here. Politically, it would be difficult in Israel to do that because the advantage of completing the implementation of the 20-point plan for Israel is enormous. And even though everyone wants the return of the last hostage body, of course, and obviously it should be done, and clearly pressure should be brought to bear, it's difficult to see that issue standing in the way of the tremendous benefits to all sides of completing the end of war plan if it really came down to that. But right now it does not come down to that. Right now it's something else entirely. Hamas's violations, in addition to the non-return of Gvili's body, include other things where you could portray it as a tit for tat, someone fired back. The main violation The critical, fundamental, essential, central thing is that Hamas is clearly projecting that they're not going to disarm and let go of Gaza. And that is a recipe for renewal of the war at one point or another. And Israel can just sit back and wait to be provoked. And because Hamas has provocation in their DNA, it's the raison d'etre, it's why they exist, to fight Israel. That provocation will come. This is an incredibly delicate moment. I think it should be, one of the top goals of the U.S. administration and of the Western alliance and of the world to make sure this happens and to pressure the Arabs, to pressure Hamas, to have this happen. The Palestinian Authority certainly wants it. Instead, obviously, what we see is nonsensical American saber rattling at Denmark and Greenland. I mean, depending on U.S. administration right now to do the right thing is a tragicomic venture.
Yes, and Ambassador Mukherjee, I just want to move on to you and get your insight into the movements that have occurred over the past 24 hours. Of course, more allegations of ceasefire breaches from the Israeli side. Is there any hope to move on to phase 2 of Trump's 20-point plan?
Actually, the complete disarmament of Hamas, as you yourself pointed out, Thomas, was going to happen in phase 2. With regard to this one remaining body, I was told by many commentators that this body is buried under a huge amount of concrete, etc., etc. It is not physically possible at the moment to extricate and hand over the body as should be done, but it's physically impossible right now. A bigger.
May I respond to that?
Let me just finish.
Of course, Dan. Dan, apologies, Ambassador. We'll bring you back in. Dan, briefly, if that's all right.
Of course, the body could well be buried under rubble, but no one believes Hamas, and no one really ever should believe Hamas. But trust me, their modus operandi does not include a need to tell the truth to journalists. They have a history of pretending they can't find bodies, and then when they need to, they find them. There was a body held, 2 bodies held for years, one for 11 years. That was just handed over now as part of this new Gaza war's denouement. So, whereas it makes some sense that they can't find the last body, they had also been claiming such problems during the entire last 3-4 months of delays. And each time under pressure, they magically found the body. So there's a lot of skepticism about their claim, although it sounds like it might be true. Coming from Hamas, everything is met with a grain of salt.
Okay, Ambassador Mukherjee, please.
Hamas came from Western diplomatic sources, but you would know Hamas much better than we in India. Fortunately, we have difficult neighbors, but we don't have Hamas as our neighbor. So you would know better than me.
Yes.
What I was trying to continue and say is that one of the main difficulties is that it would appear that the American president, as you yourself said, Dan, seems to have taken his eye off this issue, and he has got diverted into 2 things. One, dividing up the world into 3 poles. One, the American-dominated pole, which would be Latin America and the Western Hemisphere. The other, which would be run by Russia, and the other by China. That actually causes a lot of concern for many. And his statements, which would appear that Greenland is going to be annexed, Danish territory, and Denmark is founder member of NATO, which causes diversion of attention from what is happening in the Gaza Strip, etc., and the pressure on Hamas to continue down the path of peace so that some kind of arrangement can happen, and eventually pressure on Hamas to recognize Israel's right to exist, which they don't recognize. So until that happens, Israel can never live at peace with Hamas there, because Hamas does not accept Israel's right to exist, which is why you need to have a governance in Gaza which accommodates Israel's right to exist while accommodating the legitimate requirements of the Palestinian people. Then we had thought that perhaps it's going in that direction, along with American funds coming in to rebuild Gaza. But it would appear to me that that attention has got diverted. If it is going to come back or not, I don't know, because we are being told that President Trump is looking at Colombia, he's scolding Mexico,
Okay.
etc. So he doesn't talk anymore about Gaza and Israel anymore. It's gone off his radar.
Okay, Ambassador Mukherjee, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, this warrants a much longer discussion. However, we have run out of time. Do stay with us, Dan, as we move on to our next update. Iran is facing its largest protests in 3 years, with demonstrations spreading nationwide after a sharp drop in the rial-triggered economic unrest. The movement began with a shutdown of Tehran's bazaar on December the 28th and has grown into mass demonstrations across all 31 provinces. Security forces have responded with tear gas, live fire and violent crackdowns. At least 27 protesters, including 5 teenagers, have been confirmed killed, while authorities report attacks on police personnel. Rights groups say hospitals have been raided to detain injured demonstrators. Protesters are targeting symbols of the clerical leadership, including statues of Qasem Soleimani, and chanting slogans calling for the removal of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Exiled opposition figures and Kurdish groups have called for further protests and general strikes. Meanwhile, in the town of Mashhad, protesters have brought down the Iranian public's flag and later disfigured it. Dan Perry joins us once again to discuss the developing situation happening in Iran. Over the past 12 days, of course, we've seen unrest that has spread throughout the entire nation. Are these protests different to what we have seen previously, Dan? Could this be part of something bigger?
Well, they're actually smaller than protests that we saw at various junctures some years ago. The difference is that the government is much weaker and sees itself as more brittle than it perhaps did a few years ago, and again, more than a decade ago, and we had 2 other waves of violence and protests. And by the way, the protests are increasing all the time at great speed. That may also be a difference. The context is that the rial really has collapsed since the June war with Israel. The June war with Israel constituted a spectacular humiliation for the Islamic Republic. Its airspace was completely unprotected. Its key military and nuclear scientific figures were eliminated in the first hours of the war. Its nuclear program and ballistic missile program were muchly destroyed. And it's been exposed as a bit of a paper tiger. Moreover, it's the various militias that the Islamic Republic had squandered the Iranian people's diminishing financial resources on all around the region. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Iraqi militias have been also set back in the past 2 years of war. So the entire Iranian jihadist chaos project is on a back foot. The economy in Iran is in shambles, and there is a middle class and a youthful contingent in the Iranian population that has really had enough with the Islamic Republic. But oftentimes, and I would add usually in such situations, it's the military that in the end determines what will happen. And we've already seen dozens of people killed in these past almost 2 weeks of rioting, and much depends on whether the military agrees to continue this. If they don't, if the military breaks with the Islamic Republic, that's very dramatic, and that could echo what happened, for example, in Romania in 1989, or in Egypt in 2011, when what looked like a revolution was essentially, at the end of the day, a military coup coming on top of popular discontent and protest in the streets. I think Trump was right in warning that America is locked and loaded to come to the rescue if Iran starts killing people in the streets. But of course, Trump being Trump, he took his eye off the ball, or appears to have. They need to double down on that warning and make very clear to the Iranian military and also to the others, to the Revolutionary Guard and to the police, that the world will not stand for a massacre of Iranians. The military specifically should have motivation in correcting their own mistake in 1979, when they allowed the original Ayatollah Khamenei to, within months of his return after the Shah had fled, establish Islamist theocracy and a total police state by virtue of a referendum that was completely falsified, where 99% of the Iranians supposedly agreed to this, and the military stood by and let it happen because they thought that Khomeini would be some temporary transition figure, and the idea of a ruthless theocracy is one they could not possibly be serious about. Well, that was a monumental, colossal, tragic miscalculation, and it may want to correct it at this time.
Dan Perry, as always, it is a pleasure. Thank you very much for taking the time and joining us here on NewsX World. We now move.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we...
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. President Donald Trump has said that he expects to meet Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Meanwhile, interim leader Delcy Rodriguez has rejected Trump's claim of U.S. control, insisting Venezuela remains sovereign. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian drone strikes has hit Kyiv just before midnight of Friday, killing 4 people, including an emergency medic, and injuring at least 19 people, with 14 hospitalized. Military administration had reports buildings and critical infrastructure were being damaged as well. According to U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, India's trade deal with the United States stalled after Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not make a call to President Donald Trump to seal the agreement, leading to Washington doubling tariffs on Indian goods to 50%, including a 25% penalty over India's Russian oil purchases. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance urged Europe to take Donald Trump seriously on Greenland after Washington floated buying the Danish territory and did not rule out military action to secure it. Israeli strikes killed at least 13 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip on Thursday after the Israeli military said it targeted a site following a failed rocket launch, with medics reporting that 4 people, including children, were killed in a tent strike in Khan Yunis, while Hamas claims more than 1,100 Israeli ceasefire violations since October. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will visit Japan Tuesday to meet Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi in Nara. The summit will include discussions and a dinner on regional global issues. A South Korean government commissioner report has found that the December 2024 Jeju Air Boeing 737-800 crash, which killed 179 of 181 people on board, might not have been fatal without a concrete mound supporting a localizer antenna that failed international safety standards. As victims' families and lawmakers now press for accountability over alleged government negligence. US President Donald Trump said he held a great meeting with Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan, calling him very successful and praising the US government's 10% stake in the chip maker. Intel shares have jumped in extended trading, up about 75% since the CHIPS Act investment. Now for this hour, we start with U.S. The Portland Police Bureau has confirmed that the FBI is leading the investigation into a shooting involving federal agents in East Portland. Portland Police Chief Bob Day has stated that while local police secured the scene and provided initial medical aid, the FBI Portland Field Office is the lead agency for the federal investigation. This comes as ICE federal agents shot 2 people in Portland, prompting local leaders to demand an end to an immigration crackdown there, while also urging calm in community known for political dissent. The Department of Homeland Security says that the shooting occurred while Border Patrol agents were conducting a targeted stop on a vehicle carrying 2 people allegedly affiliated with the Tren de Aragua gang. Let's have a look at what the Portland Police Chief has shared.
Approximately 2:18 this afternoon, Portland police officers responded to the 10,000 block of Southeast Main Street on the report of a shooting. So it came in via a 911 call. Officers confirmed that federal agents had been involved in a shooting. Portland police were not involved in that incident. About 6 minutes later, at 2:24 p.m., officers received information, once again through dispatch, that a man who had been shot was calling and requesting help in the area of Northeast 146th and East Burnside. Our officers responded. We found a male and a female with apparent gunshot wounds. Officers applied a tourniquet and summoned emergency medical personnel. The patients were transported to local hospital, and their conditions at this time are unknown. Officers had determined that the 2 people who were injured in the shooting involving the federal agents from the earlier call. PPB officers secured both scenes, and this is a federal investigation. It's being led by the FBI. This is not any way, shape, or form immigration related on our end. We do not know the facts of this case. We are simply providing that traditional investigative support and perimeter support.
Now for this discussion, we welcome retired Major General Sudhakarji. He's a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, what is going on with U.S.? We are seeing so many news like this since last year, but particularly in the past 48 hours. What's happening in U.S.?
Good afternoon, Asuma. Thank you so much for inviting me to your show.
Thank you.
It's total, I would say, disorder, and this has come after J.D. Vance announced that the ICE staff or the custom duties and border protection staff are legally immune to any kind of actions taken by them or words to that effect. It has empowered the government officials working for the ICE with, I would say, eternal kind of a courage to resort to firing at the suspected or potentially dangerous or maybe kind of a imaginary kind of a threat. At the moment, I personally feel that too much of empowerment has been done. The complete law has been weaponized to an extent that even slightest of suspicion is triggering a proactive kind of a measure which is being called as a defensive measure for protection of the government officials operating under the umbrella of ICE or the customs duties and the border protection duties, which is part of the homeland security. Now, at this rate, it's going to antagonize the public, and I personally feel they may come on the street against the ICE department. While the angle of Venezuelan linkage is being thrown up, however, the same thing in absence of any kind of concrete evidence is actually going to put the government officials in thick soup. So therefore, it do better to them that minimum force as applied as per the teaching of security protection duties should be applied by the government officials. And they are resorting to extreme steps, which is highly dangerous. and it may give an ugly turn to the entire mandate which they have been empowered with, and people may take violent steps against the ICE staff. Back to you, Asuma.
Thank you very much, Major General, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus to Europe, the European Union has said that it has discussed how Europe should respond if the United States moves forward with a possible bid to acquire Greenland. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the bloc has examined potential European reactions, calling recent messages from Washington on Greenland extremely concerning. Greenland is a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark and a strategic part of the Arctic region. The comments come as the White House confirmed that President Donald Trump and his national security team are holding active discussions about a possible U.S. purchase of Greenland, even as Washington insists the president remains committed to the NATO alliance. Let's listen in.
Of course, the messages that we hear regarding Greenland are extremely concerning, and we have had discussions also among the Europeans. If this is a real threat, and if it is, then what would be our response? So, as Denmark has been a good ally for United States, and all these statements are not really helping the stability of the world, I would say.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back retired Major General Sudhakarji. He's a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General, for staying with us. Now looking at this, it seems like Trump sees not just Greenland, but Europe differently than his predecessors or his previous U.S. president or the administration. Why do you think Trump sees Europe not like close ally, and there's a huge difference of his approach to Europe?
Yeah, excellent question you have raised. You see, the entire evolving dynamics during Donald Trump 2.0 tenure as president is witnessing departure from the traditional norms and practices which USA as a superpower has been exercising. And in that departure, what comes out is belligerence and aggressive stance taken by Donald Trump and his team towards extending the sphere of influence and dominance. Why is he doing it is because of a maybe real, maybe perceived threat of Russian and Chinese vessels and thronging along the coastline. Just for our viewers to understand, Greenland is a semi-autonomous territory, like you have rightly highlighted in your preamble, and it is a part of Denmark. Also, if you allow me, I wish to remind the audience and also American audience who are listening to this particular discussion is that in 1951, USA and Denmark, they have gone in for a strategic partnership, and which has led to development of bases. A few bases have come up in Cold War 2.0, and some of them also were existing during Cold War 1.0. So at the least, Donald Trump and his team would do good to revisit these kind of agreements, and that would actually give them the power and authority to expand the bases which are already existing. Acquiring or buying off Greenland, which is a piece of land roughly around 2,700 kilometers north-south and 12 to 1,400 kilometers east-west, with a coastline of roughly or maybe little more than 34,000 kilometers, is actually going to create a precedent in the world order wherein countries who similarly poised elsewhere in the world also may get encouraged to extend their sphere of influence by forcible means. So this is going against the rules-based international order, which I do not think USA should actually undertake. And second, coming straight to the point, that you are trying to dive into is that, in my opinion, it is a wrong thing happening. It should not be extended beyond a limit, because if that happens, US should remember that it is a member of NATO, a founding member of the NATO, and Denmark is also a NATO member, and therefore, if at all there is a threat evolving, then perhaps they would do well if the entire NATO comes collectively to ensure some defensive countermeasure adopted in Greenland. Last but not the least is that why is he looking at Europe the way he is looking at? He is looking at Europe the way he is looking at is primarily is driven by the fact that the economics of USA is actually taking a nosedive. 38 trillion US dollar economy debt means around 128 to 130% of debt to GDP ratio. What it means is that they have to dole out something close to 1 trillion US dollars simply for debt interest servicing, and to run the country they require something close to 6 trillion US dollar, to which they are generating a revenue of just about 4 trillion. There is a deficit of 2 trillion here, and 1 trillion required for the interest servicing. 3 trillion is a hell of a big amount. And in the given or evolving geopolitical dimensions and the geoeconomic dynamics, the USA is feeling very insecure and threatened, and therefore it is trying to minimize its responsibility elsewhere outside the America, where it has been taking the burden of expenditure, be it for the security, safety, or otherwise. Therefore, USA is thinking of pulling back from Europe, also propping up Russia to be a peer group member for G8, restoration of the G8 membership status, as also bringing Russia back to the mainstream geopolitical ecosystem in the world order, so that the deep embrace it has gone in with China is prevented. And also with regard to China, Europe is totally dependent on China, so big threat as far as America and Donald Trump is concerned as of now is that China, Russia and the countries of the BRICS are posing a big threat towards the de-dollarization, which is actually creating a lot of trauma in the minds of the Donald Trump and his team. De-dollarization, when I say what I mean is at the peak period, dollar is to dominate something close to 86 to 89% as the international reserve currency. However, during pandemic, it fell down to almost about 54%. Now I believe it is bounced back to 56%. Experts say that whenever the dominance of dollar goes below, slips down below 50%, that will be a kind of a irreversible phenomena of the declining superpower status. And no superpower would like to lose its supremacy and authority. So there is a big scare, and therefore Donald Trump, in the big design of operations, he's trying to crack and whip up his effort to come down heavily on against the BRICS, and also prevent de-dollarization as much as possible. Back to you, Soma.
Thank you for highlighting that. Just building on your answer, Major General, two questions from me. One is that, so does NATO have any card to play to protect their territory, or, knowing that US is also, of course, within NATO alliance, but since it's threatening another NATO country, how will NATO play this out? Is NATO strong enough? And also my second question is, maybe you can just briefly touch upon this, but why do many countries, kind of forget to protect their land in the north? Just like Denmark didn't maybe do enough for Greenland, that's why this is happening. And then again, many countries in the world, they tend to forget about the importance of their land in the north.
Greenland is a huge territory. It is 2/3 of Greenland falls under the sphere of Arctic, and as we all know that the ice is melting along the Arctic. There are new maritime navigation routes, sea routes opening up, and this will entail a lot of geostrategic implications. Therefore, the Arctic Council, which at the moment comprises of 8 countries, based on the geographic location, they dominate or their presence is very much there. However, coming to your first question as to why not NATO is able to look after its landed property. NATO is all by itself, less America and Canada is not capable. That is the European Union and the UK. They are not capable, not the capacity permits them as of now, because they have had a kind of a free lunch all the while during Cold War 1.0 and the time period till now in Cold War 2.0. So therefore, to actually upgrade their status from zero responsibility and burden to some responsibility and accountability to defend themselves and look after their landed estate as of now is near impossible. Therefore, they are dependent on America. NATO, anything to do with NATO, less USA, is as good as a defunct kind of an establishment. Therefore, their dependency is heightened because of traditional support they have been having from USA. Coming to the second point that you have raised, I personally feel that there are no better ways than diplomacy and dialogue. They need to talk it out, even if Donald Trump is hell-bent and intransigent in his approach. There are ways and means to actually defend and ensure security and safety of the people of America. Presently, he's focusing on BRICS, Russia and China being founding members of BRICS. They continue to actually expand their sphere of influence through the Arctic and coming down towards the Atlantic in a very convenient and comfortable manner, which is posing a threat to America. So therefore, at the moment, America feels that it is the only country in the world which can deter or prevent expansion of the BRICS domination in the world order. BRICS as such has got 10 members as on today. There are good about 11 members who are waiting, and roughly 50 more countries are waiting to join the BRICS. And the GDP of BRICS earlier in 1995, although it had not come into existence, was just about 16%. But the BRICS has actually grown in its size in the GDP and overtaken the G7 leading economies, and is touching a percentage of 36.7 to 37.3% of global GDP in PPP terms. And the leading economy, which was there in 1995 at 43.06% of GDP in PPP terms, has gone down to 29.7 to 30%, and therefore it's on a declining mode. And to me, what appears is that it is all the geoeconomics which is driving the current agenda, which is very, very dangerous for America to undertake in this aggressive manner. It may bounce back on their face and may turn out to be highly disadvantageous in times ahead.
With that, I would like to thank Major General Sudakarji for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on the focus on to Middle East. Israeli strikes across the Gaza Strip has killed at least 11 Palestinians, including children. The attacks came after a rocket fired from Gaza towards Israel fell short and landed near a hospital. Airstrikes hit a tent in southern Khan Yunis, a school sheltering displaced families in Jabalia, and locations in central and northern Gaza, causing multiple casualties. Israel said it targeted Hamas militants, rocket launch sites, and terror infrastructure. The ceasefire agreed in October is fragile, with both sides accusing each other of violations. Israel has not opened crossings or allowed some humanitarian staff into Gaza, while Hamas continues to assert control and refuses to disarm. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Peter Baum. He's the editor at Weekly Blitz, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mr. Baum, for joining us. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Suna.
Thank you. Now, as you know, both sides blame each other for this ceasefire violations. What's your analysis on this situation? Are they ready to move towards phase 2? And do you think U.S. is still interested in brokering and pushing the ceasefire to phase 2? Because we see U.S. it seems like they're very busy and they have handful of a lot of things going on.
you're quite right. And to answer your question directly, yes, I do think Israel and the US both want to move to stage 2 of the Trump peace proposal. But this particular story is quite remarkable in itself. Paradoxically, it's a major loss for Hamas, not because of the injuries and deaths suffered, and a major win for Israel from a public relations point of view. And let me explain why to your audience and listeners. From December the 31st, as far as I've been tracking it, Hamas has attempted and failed to launch 4 projectiles aimed at Israel in order to create 2 things. The first thing, damage, but the second thing, Hamas are in dire need of a major public relations win. They need to be seen to be back on the front pages of all the newspapers and to be the first or second item along the major media news channels in Europe and elsewhere. Now, the 3 previous launches, Israel successfully destroyed, and there was very, very little news across all the media channels about the destruction of the 3 previous attempts. And don't forget, I'm a political researcher, and my speciality is in the Israel-Palestinian issue. So it was quite remarkable to me that the 3 previous attempts, which were attempted but Israel managed to locate and destroyed, hardly got any news. And again, this was all designed to give Hamas a major PR win. Now, the 4th one, which happened about 20 hours or so ago now, Hamas were able to launch, but Israel's technology is so sophisticated that from the information I've received, Israel was able to understand and detect that the missile fired was going to fall short. So she allowed the trajectory of she allowed the missile to land. Her response was, as we've seen, such that Hamas medical authorities were reporting 11 dead. Now, in normal circumstances, this story alone would have been at least the 1st, 2nd or 3rd story amongst all the major mainstream news channels, including the BBC, CNN, RT in France, etc., Al Jazeera. I've spent the last 45 minutes trawling through all the papers, all the media news channels which I have at my easy disposal, and even Al Jazeera has it as its 6th story, although Al Jazeera has stated that there have been 14 deaths and not the 11 that the Palestinians have promoted, and yet every other major news channel has ignored it. Now, why? Clearly, because there are other things going on in the world, such as Venezuela, such as Iran, such as the Syria-Kurdish issue, which I know your own channel has been covering quite in detail. There's what's going on domestically in the United States with the Minneapolis shootings. So Hamas's timing of trying to get themselves back on the front pages has failed dramatically. Israel, being aware of this, took the opportunity to strike back. And as we know, whenever Israel strikes back, they never, according to the media, they never ever kill Hamas operatives. It's always women and children that have been killed in the strike backs, according to the media. Well, I'm afraid for Hamas, their opportunistic attempts to try and get themselves back in the media spotlight has failed dramatically. Israel, from this particular destruction of the launcher and the 3 previous ones, which also managed to locate further underground tunnels, previously hidden from Israeli view, was another major military win for the Israelis. And from a PR view, as I've said, this story, other than being the fifth story on Al Jazeera, I think Reuters have covered it some time ago, and naturally all the Israeli press, which is quite right, have been covering the story, but the world's media have completely ignored it, and this will give comfort to Israel and will be a major blow from a public relations point of view to Hamas.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Peter Baum for joining us today from London and sharing that insight with us on NewsX World. Now we move on to Japan. Local media has reported that central Japan's Yamanashi Prefecture has ordered the evacuation of nearly 150 residents following the outbreak of a forest fire on Mount Ogi. As of today morning, no damage to infrastructure or surrounding homes had been reported. The Japan Self-Defense Forces deployed several helicopters to assist firefighting efforts. According to local fire authorities, the fire first reported around 10:40 a.m. local time by a resident who noticed smoke on the mountain had spread at least 150 meters from residential areas. Now we move on to our tech news. French health tech company Withings is making a big push into longevity with its new body scan 2 smart scale unveiled at CES in Las Vegas. Priced at $600, the AI-powered scale tracks more than 60 biomarkers to detect early health risks like high blood pressure and pre-diabetes. With embedded electrodes, a retractable handle, and a phone syncing, it aims to help users age healthier through better data. CES attendee Doris Poon praised the device, saying it helps people understand their health before problems arise. Withings says the body scan 2 will be available in the second quarter of 2026. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. President Donald Trump has said that he expects to meet Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Meanwhile, interim leader Delcy Rodriguez has rejected Trump's claim of U.S. control, insisting Venezuela remains sovereign. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has urged Europe to take Donald Trump seriously on Greenland after Washington floated buying the Danish territory and did not rule out military action to secure it. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed welcomed Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Addis Ababa for the first stop of the diplomats' New Year trip to Africa. The two leaders pledged deeper cooperation on issues including trade, infrastructure, energy, and transportation. Egypt and the European Union said they are working to implement the second phase of the US-brokered Gaza ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. Speaking in Cairo, according to joint press remarks, Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati and EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the body must begin work without delay. According to Syrian state media, Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara held a phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron to discuss bilateral cooperation and latest developments in Syria and the region, while Syria thanked France for supporting Syria's stability and humanitarian recovery. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara held a phone call to discuss latest developments in Syria and efforts to strengthen regional stability. Al-Shara stressed the need to extend state sovereignty across all Syria, while Erdogan reaffirmed Turkey's support through joint coordination against shared threats. Jordan's King Abdullah, European Council President Antonio Costa, and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen concluded the first EU-Jordan summit in Amman, reaffirming a strategic and comprehensive partnership. According to a joint statement, the leaders pledged deepened cooperation and strongly backed two-state solution for Palestine. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman says NASA astronauts aboard the International Space Station will return to Earth earlier than planned, following a medical issue involving one crew member. Now for this hour, we start with US and Venezuela. US President Donald Trump has said that he expects to meet with Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, the Nobel Peace Prize winner who was in hiding during a deposed President Nicolas Maduro's rule. Meanwhile, Venezuela's interim president Delcy Rodriguez insists that her country is not subjugated, despite US President Donald Trump's claim to be in charge there after removing her predecessor, Nicolas Maduro. She also emphasized that Venezuela remains autonomous and independent despite the military operation, and there was no passivity during the attacks. Rodriguez has made the remarks during a ceremony for the 100 Venezuelans that her government says were killed during the U.S. assault. Let's listen into what the interim president of Venezuela has shared.
Y cobardes, les estamos legando la historia de un país que no se rinde, de un país que no se subordina. No estamos subordinados, ni estamos sometidos. Tenemos dignidad histórica y tenemos compromiso y lealtad con el presidente Nicolás Maduro, que ha sido secuestrado. Tenemos lealtad con la primera combatienta diputada Cilia Flores y hemos comprometido no descansar hasta verlos en libertad, de vuelta a su casa y de vuelta.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Matthew Vadam. He's an American journalist, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vadam, for joining us once again. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Now, looking at this, can you tell us how does U.S., in particular the U.S. administration and President Trump, feels about, Maria Corina Machado and also Rodriguez?
Well, obviously, President Trump would prefer to have Machado in power, but there was an intelligence report that concluded, U.S. intelligence, concluded that she didn't have enough support in the country, particularly the support of the armed forces in Venezuela, and that she wouldn't be able to control it. She would not be able to successfully run a government. And so that is why President Trump temporarily allowed Rodriguez to become the acting president of Venezuela. But there's no indication that interim status is going to continue for very long. There are discussions right now about whether Venezuela should hold fresh elections. In fact, Machado herself, I believe, is on record in the last couple of days saying she thinks Venezuela should have fresh elections because the ones last year were tainted and Maduro cheated and rigged the elections that allowed him to, continue on as president. So I think that President Trump has warm feelings towards Machado, but he doesn't think his feeling is he doesn't want to hand over the country to her and for it to degenerate into chaos and for them to be like, for example, a military coup that would overthrow her. So that is his concern for stability. And I'm not saying I agree with his concerns. I'm just telling you that's what the Trump administration's position appears to be on this matter.
Thank you for sharing that. And what do you think Trump's administration would do to increase, the popularity of Machado in South America or in Venezuela now?
I'm not sure what he can do to increase her popularity. She's pretty popular, I think, among voters, but she doesn't have the support. She doesn't have institutional support. She doesn't apparently have support within the current government among, top bureaucrats and members of the military. And I think they have to be won over or they need to be replaced. See, the problem is President Trump didn't decapitate the government as a lot of us thought he was in the process of doing. He merely instigated a coup, in effect, and spirited Maduro out of the country to face drug and narco trafficking charges in the United States. He did not eliminate the communist, socialist-inspired government there, and that's a problem. And now that the most urgent matter, getting rid of deposing Maduro, has been taken care of, now Trump has to figure out how he moves on to the next step and tries to give Venezuela some democratic stability. And I'm not sure if he has answers for that yet. Remember, the invasion was, less than a week ago. The invasion that extracted Maduro. They haven't kept troops in the country. They've surrounded the country by sea with a vast American armada. So I don't know if it's fully been thought out, and if the government has plans, I don't think that they have released all of those plans. They're not, public record, and for good reason, for matters of national security. They can't tell their would-be enemies every step that they're going to take. So, I think a lot of work has to be done to stabilize Venezuela, and there are talks ongoing with Machado to figure out how to do that.
Thank you for laying it out all that for us, Mr. Vadam. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now, we stay in the U.S. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt has said that the U.S. law enforcement officers face organized attack. This comes as on January 7th, a U.S. immigration agent fatally shot a 37-year-old mother of 3 in Minneapolis. State and federal officials offered starkly different accounts of the shooting, in which an unidentified immigration and customs enforcement agent shot U.S. citizens Renee Nicole Good in a residential neighborhood. Let's in fact listen into what Karoline Leavitt has said about the incident.
The deadly incident that took place in Minnesota yesterday occurred as a result of a larger, sinister, left-wing movement that has spread across our country, where our brave men and women of federal law enforcement are under organized attack.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Matthew Vadam. He's an American journalist, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vadam, for staying with us. Now, we are hearing a lot of different reports and different interpretation of this particular incident that has occurred. What more can you tell us about this incident from U.S.?
There was an incident in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where a woman, a radical activist, was monitoring the activities of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, in a neighborhood in Minneapolis. And at one point, this has been shown on all sorts of videos shot from different angles. At one point, she's approached by ICE agents, and she won't get out of the car. She's asked to get out of her car, and instead she starts revving the engine. The wheels of the front of her SUV start spinning on the ice on the road in Minneapolis. And then there is an ICE agent in front of the vehicle. And, it's not always obvious. It's not entirely obvious from the videos, but if you watch them a few times, the man, the agent appears to be positioned in front of the SUV, and it looks like she's turning the wheel to leave after being ordered out of the car. So she's disobeying an order from a police officer, a law enforcement official, and then as she's turning the wheel, the vehicle is moving towards the ICE agent, and so it appears that the ICE agent then thought that his life was in danger, and he fired several shots, at least 2 shots through the windshield, and struck her, and she died. There are some people saying that this is an act of murder and that ICE is, an evil organization, and that the agent needs to be brought to justice. But in cases like this, when it is whether it's obvious or whether it's a borderline case, the police officer tends to be given the benefit of the doubt, and you can see in the videos that have been shown that the vehicle is moving towards him. And I would think that when all is said and done, the courts will, if this ever makes it to court, the courts will find that the agent was right to fear for his life and to take action. Now, maybe he could have jumped out of the way, but when you only have a fraction of a second to react to a potentially life-threatening situation, some people will go on instinct. They will do the best that they can. So I can understand why people are upset with this, but it looks to me that, like the immigration enforcement official acted reasonably. But I understand why people are upset. A mother has died. She put herself, she died by misadventure. She is the author of her own misfortune. She put herself into a dangerous situation, and she reacted badly. She could have just stopped the vehicle. She could have, cooperated with the law enforcement officers. In the United States, when a police officer asks you to get out of there are a lot of things you can say no to a cop for. You can refuse, sometimes to do a field sobriety test if you're being accused of drinking and driving. You can, refuse to give your name in certain situations. You can refuse to give evidence against yourself or to discuss certain things. You don't have to talk to the police. But when the police ordered you out of your vehicle, there's just about no lawful excuse that you can offer for not getting out of the vehicle. So she should have stopped the vehicle. She should have gotten out. She didn't. She tried to drive away. It looks from the video like she was trying to hit the police officer, and in fact she did at least bump him, though it's not quite clear if it was, caused him any injury.
Yes.
But she did bump him with her vehicle, and she's in the wrong, and now she's dead. And it's a tragic thing, but that appears to be what happened.
Thank you for sharing that
Okay.
all. Thank you very much, Mr. Vadam.
All right.
Protesters demonstrating against the killing of a woman by an immigration officer in the U.S. Midwestern city of Minneapolis clash with law enforcement agents as anger mounts over the shooting. Profanities and a tear gas-like chemical irritant filled the air as protesters and immigration agents scuffled and shoved each other in Minneapolis. Protesters have gathered before dawn outside the Bishop Henry Whipple Federal Building, home to one of Minnesota's main immigration courts. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Vadam. Thank you, Mr. Vadam, for staying with us. Now, is this protest still going on, and do you know how many people were in this protest?
I don't know how many people were involved, but I know that there are protests there and in other American cities against ICE, and it didn't just start with this unfortunate incident in Minneapolis where the mother was killed. So yeah, I don't know the extent of it, but I know that that there are some people who are concerned that ICE is too powerful, and they don't like ICE going in and arresting people. and they're not happy about that. Other people are simply political radicals, and they want to use this as an opportunity to turn people against law and order, to turn people against the system and against the Trump administration. And they view it as a political opportunity. So, you have a mixture of both kinds of people involved in protesting ICE at this time. A lot of these people are very violent, as we've seen in Portland, Oregon, and in Chicago, Illinois, and in Los Angeles,
Thank you, Mr.
where they've been particularly active in using physical force against ICE operations.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Matthew Vadam for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we stay in US. US President Donald Trump has signaled a major escalation in the fight against drug cartels. Trump has said that land strikes against cartels are coming soon. He said the move would follow recent US maritime attacks in the Eastern Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. Trump did not share operational details or timelines. In an interview, he claimed drug cartels are effectively running Mexico. Trump has said the United States is now prepared to expand its actions beyond the seas and onto the land. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Adrian Calamel. He's a terrorism scholar, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Mr. Calamel, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now looking at
Great to see you, Suma.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, thank you very much. Now looking at this, how would, designating a drug cartel as targets for U.S. land strikes alter the typical or conceptual boundary between criminal organizations and terrorist groups? And now what risk of escalation will this hold if, Trump goes ahead with land strikes?
Yeah, a great question, Asuma, and that's a difficult, this is a really weird place to be in right now when we're talking about this. As Matthew was saying before when he was talking about Venezuela, is that the institutions around Maduro are still there, so the military, but he's got multiple layers of institutions. Some are in those narco terrorist groups. They are economic producers, and they're also muscle or thugs for Maduro. You also have to remember that the relationship between Hezbollah and the Venezuelan cartels is extremely tight. So if we start hitting, and maybe this is the goal, if we start hitting cartels that are operating, let's say, not inside cities, but start using airstrikes to take out cartels that are operating in rather rural areas. If we start hitting those, are we going to start hitting Hezbollah members and other individuals as well? Not that Trump would have a problem with this. And also, is this an attempt to kind of shed one of those security blankets around those institutions that protected Maduro? It's interesting where this is going with the talks about mainland strikes. I hope there is a real plan here at this point. I was feeling pretty confident when I was talking to you yesterday, Asuma, and this evening when I hear about land strikes hitting cartels, I start to get a little bit nervous. I will say this, it's a lot, when he came into office and he specifically mentioned the Mexican cartels, that becomes a lot more dangerous for the United States because that's right on our border. And the Mexican cartel probably could overpower the Mexican armies if they bandied together, if you look at the cartel. So it's a bit of an apples to oranges comparison there. But it still gives me cause for concern. Is this going to turn into what we would call mission creep, where we really don't have a plan, but we're just kind of creeping along and getting more and more and more involved than we should be, than we need to be?
Do you think that, American people will kind of maybe demonstrate against this? How is the reaction like in US?
Yeah, well, the reaction in the United States, I think it's ultimately gonna be split, and I think, well, you will have I would say almost every single Democrat except for maybe John Fetterman come out against this. If we're just talking about politicians, if you talk about Republicans, the individuals that are isolationists that think that a Gulf or an ocean protects us, they're against this. They put their hat on the America first, but they don't understand that, as I mentioned, I think it was last night, that Venezuela did represent a clear and present danger to American safety. So I think it's going to be split kind of down the middle, but as we've seen with any type of conflict, the longer it goes on, the quicker you lose public opinion.
Great, that's true. Thank you for highlighting that. And lastly, Mr. Calmel, how could this framing cartels as entities running a state affect international norms on sovereignty and also the future use of counterterrorism justifications?
Yeah, another great question, Asuma. And this is the one where I look at kind of the duplicity of our foreign policy, and I'll highlight the Taliban in Afghanistan, who were sending billions of dollars to help prop up that country because they're unable to manage it and govern it, and then they siphon off the money, and they're narco-terrorists if you look at them, and groups such as Al-Qaeda and those groups make money in the heroin trade. Well, it's no different here in Venezuela, except for we've decided, it's in our hemisphere. Afghanistan, that was a 20-year war. We want to put that in the rearview mirror, pretend it didn't exist, or try and forget about the best we possibly can, and kind of move on to this and saying, this is our hemisphere, this is what we need to focus on. In reality, I think we should be, I think our approach with Afghanistan should have been much different. I don't think, but that's a discussion for a different day.
Yeah, indeed. But thank you very much, Mr. Calmel, once again for joining us and sharing that insight with us on NewsX World. Now we move on to Colombia. Colombia's most wanted rebel commander has issued a fresh call to arms following the United States seizure of Venezuela's now deposed leader, Nicolas Maduro. In a video sent to media, FARC dissident leader Ivan Mordisco summoned guerrilla commanders from Colombia and across the region, calling the United States a common enemy and urging an urgent summit of insurgent groups. The message came as Colombia and the United States signaled closer cooperation against armed groups operating along the Venezuela border. President Gustavo Petro and U.S. President Donald Trump have agreed to take a joint action against cocaine smuggling guerrillas, particularly the ELN, Colombia's last major rebel force. Colombia has accused the ELN of attacks and kidnappings of Colombian soldiers, saying fighters retreat to their bases inside of Venezuela. Now we move on to our next news. NASA has said that it will return a 4-person crew aboard the International Space Station, cutting short their mission a month early because of a serious medical condition affecting one of the astronauts. NASA on January 7th afternoon called off a planned spacewalk with 2 U.S. astronauts that had been scheduled for Thursday over what it described as a medical concern, with an astronaut later saying in a statement that it was considering ending the astronauts' rotation mission early. The agency did not disclose the name of the crew member or the medical condition, citing health privacy, but said the person is in a somewhat stable condition. Let's listen into what the NASA administration, Jared Isaacman, has shared.
So for over 60 years, NASA has set the standard for safety and security in crewed space flight. In these endeavors, including the 25 years of continuous human presence on board the International Space Station, the health and the well-being of our astronauts is always and will be our highest priority. Yesterday, January 7th, a single crew member on board the station experienced a medical situation and is now stable. After discussions with Chief Health and Medical Officer Dr. J.D. Polk and leadership across the agency, I've come to the decision that it's in the best interest of our astronauts to return Crew 11 ahead of their planned departure. Within the coming days, the Dragon Endeavour spacecraft will depart the International Space Station with Commander Zina Cardman, pilot Mike Fink, Kimya Yui from JAXA, and Oleg Platonov of Roscosmos, and safely return them to Earth. We expect to provide a further update within the next 48 hours as to the anticipated undock and re-entry.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. President Donald Trump said he expects to meet Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Meanwhile, interim leader Delcy Rodriguez rejected Trump's claims of U.S. control, insisting Venezuela remains sovereign. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian drone strikes has hit Kyiv just before midnight of Friday, killing 4 people including an emergency medic and injuring at least 19 people. With 14 hospitalized, military administration head reports buildings and critical infrastructure were damaged as well. U.S. Assistant Secretary for East Asia Michael DeSombre has said that the United States will provide $45 million in assistance to Cambodia and Thailand to support implementation of the Kuala Lumpur Peace Accords. As part of the President Donald Trump's peace brokering efforts, this comes after recent border clashes that killed at least 101 people. According to U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, India's trade deal with the United States stalled after Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not make a call to President Donald Trump to seal the agreement, leading to Washington doubling tariffs on Indian goods to 50%, including a 25% penalty over India's Russian oil purchases. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has urged Europe to take Donald Trump seriously on Greenland after Washington floated buying the Danish territory and did not rule out military action to secure it. Israeli strikes killed at least 13 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip on Thursday after the Israeli military said it targeted a site following failed rocket launch, with medics reporting that 4 people, including children, were killed in a 10th strike in Khan Yunis, while Hamas claims more than 1,100 Israeli ceasefire violations since October. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will visit Japan on Tuesday to meet Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi in Nara. The summit will include discussions and a dinner on regional and global issues. US President Donald Trump said he held a great meeting with Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan, calling him very successful and praising the US government's 10% stake in the chipmaker. Intel's shares jumped in extended trading, up about 75% since the CHIPS Act investment. Now with this, we start this hour with U.S. tensions over U.S. President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown has escalated across the United States after a second shooting involving federal immigration officers in just 2 days, deepening divisions between state and federal authorities. Protests have intensified in Minnesota after an immigration and customs enforcement officer fatally shot a 37-year-old mother during an operation in Minneapolis. State and federal officials have given sharply different accounts of what happened, with state investigators saying they were shut out of the federal probe. Just a day later in Oregon, a U.S. Border Patrol agent shot and wounded a man and a woman in Portland. Local officials said they could not independently verify the federal government's version of the events and urged calm. Democratic mayors and governors in both states are calling for federal officers to be withdrawn, saying the deployments into Democratic-led cities are fueling unrest. Civil rights groups have also condemned the enforcement actions as provocative. Federal authorities maintain that both cases vehicles were used as weapons against agents. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Keith Vaz. He's a former British minister, joins us live from Dubai. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now looking
Good
at,
to see you.
Thank you. Now looking at all the developments that happened around ICE agents, involving ICE agents in U.S., what's happening with U.S.? What's your analysis on this escalating situation with ICE agents?
Now,
Yes.
I think you've asked the right question. That should be the headline of the program. What is happening? What is going on? Because the use of ICE officers at a local level is causing alarm and concern from the mayors of particular cities, but also, more importantly, from the governors of state. These states have their own law enforcement, and indeed the local mayor has his or her own enforcement. So when you have a situation where the federal government sends in agents and it ends up with, as we've just heard, shootings of individuals, this becomes a matter of extreme concern to the public and to the state governments. So it is something that is only resolvable if you sit down and talk to the White House. But as we have seen, apart from the mayor of New York, the president of the United States has not managed to meet any of the other mayors involved, and therefore the situation has become very tense indeed.
And how do you think this latest incidents will be affecting the debate over federal immigration enforcement versus state or local governance and community safety?
I think it's going to worry. I think it's going to worry the authorities greatly. They would not have expected there to be such a reaction. The trouble is, when you make a mistake, you tend to want to admit it before there is an inquiry and before matters escalate. In this particular case, both the President and Vice President J.D. Vance have said no mistake was made, even though it's quite clear it's on video. So there are big issues to do with the way in which deniability and plausibility enter the discussion. And this is certainly not going to go away. And it matters more, in a sense, to the people of the United States than does, for example, the situation in Venezuela, because that's a faraway country. If you've got a shooting in somewhere like Minneapolis, that is, for them, down the road.
Thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Vaz. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving the focus to U.S. and Russia. U.S. President Donald Trump has indicated that he is prepared to let the last remaining U.S.-Russia nuclear arms control treaty to expire, declining a Russian offer to voluntarily extend its limits. Trump has said that if the New START treaty expires, it expires, adding that the United States would pursue a better agreement. The treaty signed in 2010 caps U.S. and Russian deployments of strategic nuclear warheads and is due to expire on 5th February. Arms control advocates warn that once the treaty lapses, the world's two largest nuclear powers could begin deploying war weapons beyond existing limits, further weakening the global arms control framework. Trump has said any replacement agreement should include China, a proposal Beijing has rejected, saying its nuclear arsenal is far smaller than those of the United States and Russia. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Keith Vaz. He's a former British minister, joins us live from Dubai. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, how dangerous is this situation, and why is Trump's attitude toward this treaty very relaxed?
Well, I think the worry is we reached a stage in world affairs where both of the big superpowers, Russia and America, agreed that it was better to spend money on their own people rather than spend money on weapons that are never going to be used. However, it's now likely that they decided, well, America has decided, there's no point in having a deal because to them, everything is interconnected. A deal on this would mean somehow getting a deal on Ukraine. And the Russians are not prepared to do a deal on Ukraine because Ukraine is not prepared to make any changes to the way in which it's conducting the war with Russia. So that's why this is coming up at this particular stage. And the Americans are very reluctant to renew. They're trying to put pressure on the Russians to settle in Ukraine.
So, now that President Trump has said that he's confident, or he at least seems confident that, I have a better deal in mind. But we don't know if that's concrete, right? So in case he is eyeing to add China into this or a better deal as per him, do you think that China will agree?
I don't know. I think that we are in the stage where we cannot predict what is going to happen between these countries. In a sense, it's easier to predict what Putin is going to do, President Putin and President Xi, than it is Donald Trump, because he seems to change the policy every single day. So I don't know the answer to that question. It's not something that one can possibly define, given what we've seen over the last few years.
Yes, 100%. And how do you think this will further, this no treaty situation will further affect international nuclear stability, and what other countries might be seeing this opportunity to arm up, add more into their arms? Do you think that maybe there will be other countries eyeing this situation?
I think a lot of other countries who would want to use this as an opportunity to give their neighbours a good battering will see this as a way of increasing their arms expenditure. You ask which countries? Any country in the world that is in dispute with its neighbour, any country in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, even the European countries, Denmark now facing the possibility of an attack from the United States. Any of these countries, the world has become unmanageable in terms of predictions and expenditure. The one thing that is certain is that the biggest beneficiaries of what we have seen since the re-election of Donald Trump, number one, definitely is going to be the arms dealers, who are going to treat this as a bonanza. They've never had it so good. Secondly, anyone who has shares in oil companies, especially American oil companies, are going to be very happy. So these are the two biggest beneficiaries. I think there are others, but those are the ones we can identify. The world has changed. That's why we're talking about this every single day. It's good for the news companies such as yours. You're never going to be bored for the next 2.5 years because of what Donald Trump is going to do. But for sure, the world is a more dangerous place because of what is going on.
That's for sure. And lastly, this potential treaties lapse, how do you think this will be affecting U.S.'s credibility even after, Trump leaves office, if he does?
Well, when he leaves office, everything that he's done is be reversed by the next president. If it's a Democrat, if it's a Republican who wants to serve 2 terms, they will also be having some nuances. And therefore, to that extent, this is a short-term thing. He's got 2.5 years left. Well, to be honest, he's got until November. If he loses control of the House of Representatives, then, of course, it all changes. So much of what he's doing is to do with the midterm elections, but he's doing it in the wrong way.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Raz. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move the focus on to Middle East. U.S. envoy Tom Barak has welcomed a ceasefire in the city of Aleppo in Syria after days of deadly fighting between the army and Kurdish fighters forced thousands of civilians to flee. Syria's defense ministry has announced a ceasefire after 3 days of clashes between government forces and Kurdish fighters in the northern city of Aleppo that has displaced thousands of people. The deadly standoff between Damascus and Kurdish authorities, who have registered integrating into the central government, is a major challenge for Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa, who has pledged to unite the country after 14 years of civil war. Now we welcome back Mr. Keith Vaz. He's a former British minister, joins us live from Dubai. Thank you very much, Mr. Vaz, for staying with us. Now looking at this, what more can you tell us about the situation with Syria? And do you think that this, Ahmad al-Sharaa, how successful is he from your analysis to include the minorities?
Well, I think that this is good news. Anything that brings about a ceasefire, especially in a country like Syria, is to be welcomed. I think now is the time to have those discussions. The president of Syria needs to include, he needs to learn from the mistakes of the Assad family, and he needs to bring communities together. How much of this is because of a dispute between communities? How much is interference by countries from outside who feel it's in their interest to destabilize Syria? Who knows? But what is very clear is that progress needs to be made to try and include more communities, more groups in this discussion, because that is the best way one can move forward.
Right. And do you think that he is do you think what do you think is U.S. envoy Tom Barak's role over there right now?
Well, America is the most powerful nation on earth. America has the most money to spend, and therefore when America gets involved, one has to take it seriously. America is only stepping in because the United Nations has lost all credibility. The UN Secretary General, I'm afraid, does not get on a plane whenever there is a dangerous area and try and bring groups together. He seems to stay in New York. And that's because when you choose these international people to run these organizations, it's always a compromise. No country wants a strong and dynamic leader. I think you've got to probably look back 10 to 15 years before you find someone with the charisma, the ability, and the sheer common sense to drive communities together. So we have to rely on these special envoys. Nobody else is doing any of the work.
Right. And do you think that America is being effective over there in regards to this situation that's unfolding?
We can't comment. We don't know. We have no idea what America's offering. If America's involved, it's usually offering one side something or the other. And as you can see with Venezuela, it's got to be in the interests of America. I'm not sure what their interest is, particularly in Syria. It can't be oil. It must be something else. And let's see how it develops.
And, going back to just Syrian president, who is Ahmad al-Sharaa now, do you think America has, what do you think is the interest of America in putting him in charge and also he hasn't directly been put in by US, but just him getting a lot of support from US is of course helping him. What do you think is their motive?
We need to ask the Americans why they're there, what they intend to do there. I would imagine it's to put pressure on the Russians. All these disputes are interconnected. If you do an organizational organogram to show why people are doing anything, you will see America right in the center of that, trying to control what's going on. It'll be good to have an explanation, but as you know, Donald Trump at the moment has his hands full.
Yes, interesting. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Keith Vaz for joining us today and sharing that insight from Dubai. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has reiterated that the settlement of Taiwan issues is purely China's internal affair and brooks no external interference. This response followed recent comments by US President Donald Trump, who stated in an interview that any military action regarding Taiwan is ultimately up to Chinese President Xi Jinping. Spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry and the Taiwan Affairs Office has emphasized that Taiwan is an inalienable part of China and that the Chinese people alone should decide how to resolve the issue. Trump's comments came after a major US military operation in Venezuela, which led some analysts to speculate on whether it set a precedent for territorial actions by other powers like China. Trump denied the situations were analogous, arguing that Taiwan did not pose the same threat to China as Venezuela did to US. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Stefan Nagy. He's a professor of politics and international studies at the International Christian University in Tokyo and senior fellow and China project lead at the Macdonald-Lowry Institute. Joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us once again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Now, looking at this, do you agree that China won't be, or do you disagree that China will not be eyeing the situation, what has been done by US towards Venezuela?
So Venezuela and the US actions against Venezuela don't really play well when it comes to Taiwan. They're very different situations. Taiwan has a very robust society, robust civil society, a strong institutions, and of course strong deterrence that it's built up over the decades. They also have the Taiwan Strait, which is very difficult to cross and engage in some kind of military conflict. But I think what's most important for us to be thinking about is that this is certainly not a green light for China, and China understands that an attack or forced reunification using military might on Taiwan would result in not a regional war but a global conflict that would have huge repercussions on the Chinese economy. We think up to 10% of global GDP would be damaged by a conflict across the Taiwan Straits. In concrete numbers, that's 10 to 12 trillion US dollars. And of course, the supply chains and production networks that bring prosperity to China would be destroyed. So generally, we think that China is not thinking about a forced reunification. It's the last choice amongst many choices that China would like would prefer, understanding that a conflict over Taiwan would be extremely damaging for the Chinese economy, but of course that would have impacts on regime stability.
Right. Is there any other motive that could be stopping China in doing the same towards Taiwan other than the GDP or economy?
Well, today the Chinese economy is largely stagnating. I mean, there is some positive growth within the economy, but at the aggregate level, it is facing a really, really difficult period. And Secretary General Xi Jinping, his biggest worry is certainly not what's happening with Taiwan or what's happening in East China or South China Sea. His biggest concern is the Chinese economy, which has really moved into a position that I think it's moving into long-term stagnation, which is going to have incredibly destabilizing effects on the domestic economy, great pressure on the one-party system that he heads, and they need to figure out how to deal with and keep the economy somewhat stable. An attack on Taiwan or any other place within the region would certainly further destabilize the domestic economy and again cause those problems in the political system, potentially in causing a regime change. And this is something that the one-party state does not want.
Right. And Professor, how is this news covered in Japan? Does Japan understand that, you mentioned, rightfully mentioned that China has different interests, and China's issue or biggest issue right now is not Taiwan's and China's reunification, but it's the stagnant economy?
The Japanese analysts are quite clear that what's happened in Venezuela does create a hypocritical position for not only the United States, but many countries that have promoted a rules-based order. On the one hand, I think that many countries are relieved and happy about President Maduro being relieved from power. He was running a narco state. He was involved with criminal activities within Venezuela and causing a huge destabilization process within South America, and again contributing to the fentanyl and other challenges associated with drugs in the United States. So I think they're relieved, but at the same time it creates huge problems in terms of that rules-based rhetoric that Japan and Canada, Australia, and many other middle powers have been arguing that they need a rules-based order to preserve peace and stability in the broader region. If the United States can do something like this that goes against the rules, the question is can Russia or China or India or other powers do the same thing? And this doesn't bode well for peace and stability in the region when great powers do what they want and middle powers and small powers endure what they must.
Right. I was talking about rule-based order. If U.S. is allowed to do this, and we know that U.S. will be, of course, having a double standard when it comes to other countries doing something similar, who do you think is capable to enforce such rule-based order now?
Well, there's a regional approach to thinking about a rules-based order, and when we think about the Indo-Pacific region, the United States has alliance partners within the region, and those partners themselves are quite significant powers, as many have written about, whether it's South Korea, Japan, Australia, Singapore. They all have significant self-defense forces or militaries that allow them to protect themselves against a great power aggression. And they're not pushovers. So I think as we think about enforcing the rules-based order, we have to think about it at a sub-regional level rather than at a global level. The United States still is head and shoulders above other powers globally, but in a regional area we see more parity, and in particular when we compare China and the United States in the Indo-Pacific, the United States still is ahead of the game in terms of comprehensive power, but China has an ability to concentrate enormous amount of resources that give it a certain edge when we think about the South China Sea or the Taiwan Straits. It's complicated, it's nuanced, and I don't think we can really argue for who can enforce the rules-based order, but rather who can disturb or unbalance the current rules-based order in a way that creates more regional instability.
Right. And what more can you tell us about this ongoing issue? How is this unfolding from your analysis?
Well, when we look at the countries looking at the United States' actions towards Venezuela, they're first thinking, what does this mean in terms of spheres of influence? Is President Trump and his new national security really only focusing on the Western Hemisphere? And will they leave or abandon the alliance system that exists within the Indo-Pacific, in particular for Japan, South Korea, and the Taiwan Protection Act, which is a form of protection against China in the case that China engages in some kind of forced reunification. So there's questions about abandonment. At the same time, they're looking at the United States and seeing if there's really any concrete changes in their investments within the region in terms of the military exercises within the region and cooperation with different self-defense forces and militaries within the region. And they're looking at diplomacy. And I think what they've come to the conclusion is that the United States' position within the Indo-Pacific region is strongest with partners that have demonstrated a track record of investing in their own protection and in the United States to help the United States make America great again. So that's Japan, South Korea, Australia, to a certain degree, Singapore, and the Philippines, and those countries that are less reliable and less involved in investing in their own security and helping the United States in terms of burden sharing are in a position where they feel less secure about the United States being anchored in the region. Over the long term, I think it's quite clear that China is the systemic challenge within the Indo-Pacific region for all countries within the region, but also the United States. If China is successful in dominating and becoming the regional hegemon within the Indo-Pacific, this would be against the United States' interests and create a risk for the United States. And I think based on that logic, the United States under President Trump, President Vance, or potentially a new president, they will all have the same logic with regards to investing in U.S. national security through strong partnerships with forward-leaning countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, to maximize U.S. security within the region through strong alliance partnerships.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Stefan Nagy for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to India and U.S. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said that India's trade deal with the United States stalled because Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not call U.S. President Donald Trump to finalize the agreement. The negotiations collapsed last year, and Trump doubled tariffs on Indian goods to 50%, including a 25% levy linked to India's purchases of Russian oil. Lutnick has said the deal was ready, but both sides were uncomfortable and the call never happened. The tariff threat has pushed the Indian rupee to record lows and increased investor concerns. India still seeks a compromise tariff rate, but progress on a new deal remains elusive. Now we move on to our next news. General Motors has said that it would take a $6 billion charge to unwind some electric vehicle investments, the latest car company to pull back from EVs in response to the Trump administration's policies and fading demand. The charge stems from reducing its planned EV production and the fallout on the supply chain, GM has said in a regulatory filing, and comes weeks after rival Ford Motor announced a similar but much bigger charge. Most of GM's write-down of $4.2 billion cash charge is related to contract cancellations and settlements with suppliers. GM has said the write-down would not affect its U.S. lineup of roughly a dozen EV models, which is the industry's broadest offering of battery-powered vehicles. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome welcome. You're watching Trending Tech on NewsX World, where we bring you the latest tech breakthroughs and trends from around the world. AI can personalize learning by adapting content to each student's strengths and weaknesses, helping teachers identify areas for improvement faster. However, integrating AI into schools faces challenges like limited infrastructure, teacher training, and affordability, particularly for schools in schools with limited funding. Protecting student data is crucial, requiring strict privacy measures. When used responsibly, AI provides real-time feedback, insights, and personalized support, enabling students to learn more effectively and teachers to make data-driven decisions. To talk about this, joining us now is Mr. Harvinder Singh Pelia. He's the founder of 10XR Club and Talent Labs and writer of The Magic Pill, where he shares his personal experience with the Ozempic drug. He's a well-recognized expert in AI, marketing, and education with deep expertise in building communities and upskilling marketers through cutting-edge technology. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Now, diving right into our discussion, how can AI personalize learning for individual students?
See, we are finally ending the era of teaching to the middle. I think there's no average student today. There's only this particular student right here, right now. And I think AI enables us to meet them exactly where they are. See, you can think of it like a difference between a mass-produced uniform and a bespoke suit, except that now the bespoke suit, it costs the same as a Netflix subscription. So no more assembly line in education. We can now start treating education like a conversation with the student.
Interesting. And can AI help teachers identify students' strengths and weaknesses faster?
See, report cards in our generation and even generations before that were always like autopsies. They told you what went wrong, especially when it was too late. I think now AI has come in like a diagnostic tool in a very live way, which lets us kind of save the patient while they're still in the room. See, teachers have a kind of an intuition, but I think AI brings a lot of structure to that. It's when you put both of them together, the teacher and the AI, is when we can ensure that no kid falls through the cracks. Not one report card at the end of the year, but just asking the simple question, how can we help this student on a random Tuesday?
That's interesting. And how is student data protected when using AI in classrooms?
See, in 2026, we are in a situation that if we don't protect the data, then generally we don't deserve the student. See, privacy is not a feature anymore. It is just a ticket to entry. We have to treat student data as well as we treat their physical safety. It's non-negotiable. It has to be locked down and it has to be constantly monitored. See, that's why privacy is not a great to have. It is basic surveillance that is a prerequisite for any kind of progress in education.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that, Mr. Singh. And what are the biggest challenges in integrating AI into schools now?
See, the technology is out there, but the issue is always the bureaucracy, right? Like this is in most economies. The challenge isn't exactly in the code. It's actually the culture, the way we think about things. The software is never the problem. The tool is never the problem. But it's always that sentence which we've been hearing a lot, that we've always done it this way. That's the root of the problem. The root of the problem is fear. It's the challenge that a machine might be able to do the job better. And we've had cycles of this throughout time. So instead of the excitement that this could help teachers do their job slightly better, there is a fear. And I think that becomes the biggest challenge.
Are there any schools that are actually integrating these kind of systems right now?
They are a bunch of schools, and we are seeing, especially at the top end of the pyramid, especially the ones which are slightly high ticket, slightly socioeconomically forward. I think they are able to do it. But where we need to see a larger part of the action is slightly down the pyramid, where AI needs to be, in education specifically, accessible as well as affordable for all, especially those with slightly more limited funding.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Singh, for highlighting that once again. And are AI tools realistically accessible and affordable for all schools, especially those with limited funding?
See, while I think the overall digital divide is closing, but the AI divide, I think that is opening up. And I think, and large corporations are actually at fault at this, where they're not exactly helping build those bridges. We don't need more paywalls exactly. If you think that AI is not expensive at a consumer level, it is. Just think of the cost of sending like yet another irrelevant graduate in the workforce in 2030 and so on and so forth, right? You have a bigger problem on your hands socioeconomically, and this is for all economies. I don't think the question is for the lower or the limited funding schools to ask the question whether we can afford AI, but they should ask the question that we can't afford not to. The most expensive thing today in education is just being obsolete today.
Right. So how can those schools, actually collect the funding, and how can they convince the parents who might be very scared or skeptical about integrating it and also exposing their kids to such high-level AI data?
See, we had the similar kind of a problem when computers came into the space of education, say in the mid-90s or the late 90s, right? Where parents had the similar problems, and even schools used to think that how can we afford X number of computers for Y number of students. See, that's where the priorities need to be set. That this might be a short-term investment, but it is a long-term investment in the entire educational infrastructure of the institute. So, of course, at that point in time, we had large organizations kind of bringing in funding and grants and subsidies, etc. Right? Microsoft did a lot of fantastic work on this. A lot of state and national governments did a lot of fantastic stuff on this. So, the same playbook which brought in computers into education 25, 30 years ago, needs to be adopted for AI to come into education today.
Right. Assuming that you're in India and I am in India, is Indian government doing that, helping underfunded schools or these schools kind of integrate and because like you mentioned earlier and you highlighted rightfully that they cannot afford to sleep on this technology?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good stuff which is already done, especially in the tier 1 cities. But once we go outside the main cities and the metros, that's where a lot leaves to be desired. Like I said earlier, I think the government and the state governments have taken the first step. Large corporations need to come in, right, with their CSR funding and everything else, so that they can make sure that this trickles down to tier 4 and 5 cities as well. Like I said, the question is not whether you can afford AI. The statement is like the writing is on the wall. You cannot afford not to have it.
Thank you once again for highlighting that. And Mr. Singh, lastly, with your experience in marketing and building communities like the 10XR Club, how can AI be used to upskill future marketers in an educational setting?
See, in a marketing context, we've realized that 10x results don't come from just working 10x harder. They come from just genuine leverage. See, today we don't need to teach students to be copywriters or to be that. They need to be able to understand, use these tools and become kind of generals of their own so-called AI armies, where tools are kind of soldiers for them in a way. See, a junior marketer today spends about 40 hours a week on just grunt work, and grunt work which can be very easily made extinct. Either they will make it extinct or somebody will do it, or somebody will do it for them. See, we are upskilling students to skip the grunt work and go straight to strategy, go straight to creative. And that's what's important. We need to use the power of AI to teach marketers how to answer questions, not how to just get into the throes of busy work again. And I think what we've been able to double click on is that the future belongs to the curious, not exactly to the busy.
That is so important. Thank you for sharing that. And what ethical concerns arise when using AI in education once again?
See, of course, the most obvious ethical point is plagiarism, right, which we see across the board. I think that's one big way in which the number of tools that you might have as an education institute. I know a lot of institute uses Turnitin and a lot of other tools to make sure that reports and papers and term papers are not completely plagiarized by the students. But the issue is that students are always very creative, right? They will always be one step ahead of the curve, and they'll make sure that they outsmart any of the tools that you will put in to prevent the unethical use of AI within the educational sphere. So the larger question becomes that while we are training AI muscles, are we need to make sure that we are not atrophying muscles that actually enable clear and independent and creative thinking, and that's what's important. So the need for more physical assessment, which means assessment on pens and papers without any digital devices, to complement what they are doing through the help of AI. I think both need to be used in the proper balance to ensure that while there is ethical use, there is also an exercising of the person's mental faculties in a very deep way.
Wow, that is so enlightening. Thank you for sharing that once again. And what is the potential of AI to foster collaboration between students in virtual environment?
Students in?
Virtual environment.
Virtual environment. See, of course, the first thing is from a reach, access, and distribution perspective. It's very important for us to understand that today, a person who is kind of deeply integrating AI into their educational experience is able to stand on the shoulder of giants, which means that they're able to access the research as well as the thinking and the collaboration of people at any corner of the globe, basically, right? So researchers in India researching on a particular science project could be collaborating with somebody sitting in China or somebody sitting in the US or so on and so forth, right? Where there's a lot of seamless exchange of idea, because all of this learning goes inside the AI tool to train it so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel so much, so and to eliminate the busy work in research so that they're able to cooperate and collaborate with each other in a virtual environment and ensure that they're only taking knowledge ahead and they're not reinventing the wheel when somebody else in some other corner of the globe has already arrived at the answer which they were originally looking to answer.
Right. And lastly, do you see there's a gap between developing countries and developed countries in this in AI, integrating AI into education?
I think, unfortunately, there is a very, very big gap. The issue is not only reach, access, and distribution. The issue is funding. The issue is also intent, right? We need to understand that while for somebody in a developed country, they may have a structured infrastructure to be able to apply AI in education, not out of their own accord, but when the institute, the school or the college or the university that they're a part of, they facilitate it. But for some people, especially in developing countries, they might have to fight that battle alone with very little institutional support, right? So that gap between developed and developing countries it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger as we go along. That's where, like I said earlier, the state and the provincial governments need to come in a very, very big way to ensure that all of these benefits don't remain a metro and tier 1 phenomena in any of the cities across the world, right? This has to trickle down to the to last mile, to the person in a village with very little access, so that they can also get all the benefits of AI that the person in the large cities have.
Thank you for sharing that insight, Mr. Harinder Singh Pilia. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Harinder Singh Pilia for joining us on this episode of Trending Tech and sharing that insight with us. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of the Trending Tech. For more updates and innovations, stay tuned to NewsX World.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Kriti Mehta. For this episode, we turn our focus to the high seas, where a dramatic US operation has sparked a global legal and geopolitical storm. The United States has seized 2 oil tankers linked to what it calls the Shadow Fleet. One of them Russian flagged in international waters. Moscow is calling it the 21st century piracy. Washington says it's law enforcement. So what do we actually know? What are the shadow fleets? Is the US being hypercritical? And most importantly, was this legal? Let's break it down. So what we know so far, on January 7 this year, US forces boarded seized a Russian flagged oil tanker about 190 miles south of Iceland in international waters. The ship, originally called Bella 1, later renamed Marinera, had been under US sanctions since 2024. Why? Washington says the vessel was part of a network moving sanctioned Iranian and Venezuelan oil, evading detection through flag changes, dark AIS periods, and complex ownership structures. The operation itself was extraordinary. US Navy SEALs were inserted by Special Operations helicopters supported by US and UK military assets. Russia confirmed it lost contact with the ship after the boarding. And crucially, US officials say a Russian submarine was in the general vicinity, raising the risk of a direct US-Russia military incident. Now, on the same day, the US also seized a second tanker, the Sophia, in the Caribbean. That ship was stateless, carrying around 2 million barrels of Venezuelan crude. Washington says this is only the beginning. To understand the situation better, let's first know what exactly a shadow fleet is. The shadow fleet, also called the dark fleet, refers to a global network of aging oil tankers used to move sanctioned or high-risk oil while hiding its origin, ownership, or destination. These vessels commonly use dark AIS periods, that's turning off transponders, fraudulent or rapid flag changes, and ship-to-ship transfers at sea, complex smell or shell ownership structures. So this system expanded rapidly after the Russia-Ukraine war, as well as under sanctions against Iran and Venezuela. An offshoot is the so-called grey fleet, vessels that are not sanctioned but show high-risk behavior patterns and require extra due diligence. What's the key point here? That this is not a few rogue ships. It's a global parallel oil supply chain keeping sanctioned states financially alive. Now, the hypocrisy That's the question. Is the US applying double standards? This is where the controversy explodes. For decades, the US has positioned itself as a defender of freedom of navigation, open seas, rules-based international order, particularly in places like the South China Sea. Now, Washington is seizing foreign flagged vessels in international waters without UN authorization. Critics call this selective enforcement. They point out the US has not signed a UN Convention on the Laws of the Seas, yet cites it when convenient. Sanctions are unilateral, not universal, and European companies have quietly enabled shadow fleets for years, but only certain states face direct military enforcement. In other words, the rules apply differently depending on who you are. Washington, however, dismisses these charges. What's Russia's response? It says it's outright piracy. Moscow's reaction was immediate and furious. Russia's transport ministry said no state has the right to use force against vessels duly registered under another nation's jurisdiction. A senior lawmaker called it 21st century piracy. Russia is demanding now the return of its crews, guarantees of human treatment, and an end to what it calls economic warfare on the high seas. China has also condemned the seizure, warning against unilateral sanctions without UN backing. So was this actually legal? This is the core question. Under United Nations Convention on the Laws of the Seas, or the UNICLOS, the high seas are governed by freedom of navigation. A state may board a foreign vessel only if it is pirate, slave trading, or stateless, broadcasting illegally, or consent is given by the flag state. The Bella 1 Marinera was flagged and not carrying oil at the time, and it was not engaged in active piracy, which makes the legal basis murky. The US argument relies on sanctions enforcement, claims of fraudulent registration, and national security authorities. But, and this is critical, sanctions are not automatically international law. They are policy tools. This is why many legal scholars say that the seizure is legally contestable and politically calculated and strategically deliberate. And this is not just about one tanker, it's about who policies the global economy, how sanctions are enforced, and whether power now defines legality on the high seas. The US is signaling it will use force. Russia and China are warning that this sets a dangerous precedent, and the shadow fleet, once operating quietly in the background, is now at the center of a global confrontation. Let's now welcome Commander Dr. Bhushan Dewan, who is a former commander in the Indian Navy, to join us in this discussion. He joins us from Mumbai. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining me in this discussion. Let me just start off with my first question to you. Now, under international maritime law, can a state legally seize a foreign flagged vessel in international waters solely based on unilateral sanctions?
Not at all. Not at all. But I think we have to understand armed forces, as far as humanity has understood it, armed forces or wars are nothing but means to achieve economic ends when diplomacy fails, and achieve those ends by war. Vasco da Gama, etc., East India Company, etc., they all came here. They made colonies out of us, not out of us, almost more than half the world. The point is, where was the law? There's no law at all when the might is right. This currency is being given a encouragement by US actions. At the same time, I must tell you, capturing Maduro, there is also another thing which America has said. They've said that he was a criminal. See that there are criminal charges pressed against him. That is how he was presented in the New York court. And so we were, and President Trump has told his government and political institutions that this was enforcing, catching a criminal. It was not declaring war because Trump, president of USA, cannot declare war unilaterally. This is what he has taken, the plea. Secondly, I must tell you, practically if you see things on the ground, 30-40% people in Venezuela are happy that Maduro has been arrested and taken away. Because they are suffering economically so badly. And if you read the history over last 1 or 2 years, since January 25, since Trump's coming to chair second time, Trump 2.0, how they have broken bought the loyalty of the 2,000 guards, this inner circle protecting Maduro, by bribing them heavily. And one of the guards, he had a 6-year-old key person, 32 years person, and a 6-year-old daughter. She was suffering from serious illness. And Americans said, don't worry, we are flying her right now to America for treatment, and for lifelong we'll give treatment. And then those guards said, look here, if we support you, then what happens? Tomorrow if your attack fails, then we'll be butchered by president. So what they have done, these guards which have been broken into, which have been bought over, their families have already been smuggled out into USA by helicopters, by commercial flights. The point I'm making is another thing. Now, Ukraine, attack on Ukraine. Europeans
Dr.
and
Dewan, we'll go one by one. We have a series of questions that we want to address. So I take your point there. But let me move on to my next question so we can cover it holistically, step by step. Now, would you say that the US is also undermining its long-standing position on the freedom of navigation by enforcing these sanctions through military seizures, which is the very principle it invokes against China in the South China Sea?
You're right, but please tell me 2016 agreement by the International Court of Justice, wherein they have allowed that Philippines' rights have been upheld under own clause, this law of seas, that Convention of Law of Seas. You know that America is supporting Philippines against China in the Spartic Islands and those things being captured by China or Philippines. America is saying that the UNCLOS is being bypassed. Surprises. USA is not a signatory on UNCLOS. I think you also just mentioned it, perhaps.
Yeah.
So what are they flouting really? They are not. Of course, there are other laws that 12 nautical miles is the territorial waters, which is beyond that. There is some EEZ. EEZ, the ships can move unless they are suspicious. And the international waters, anybody is free to go. So using these words, rule-based order, all that, all these words are.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. President Donald Trump has said that he expects to meet Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Meanwhile, interim leader Delcy Rodriguez has rejected Trump's claims of U.S. control, insisting Venezuela remains sovereign. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian drone strikes has hit Kyiv just before midnight of Friday, killing 4 people, including an emergency medic, and injuring at least 19 people, with 14 hospitalized. Military administration head reports buildings and critical infrastructure were damaged as well. U.S. Assistant Secretary for East Asia Michael Desombre has said that the United States will provide $45 million in assistance to Cambodia and Thailand to support implementation of the Kuala Lumpur Peace Accords as part of the President Donald Trump's peace brokering efforts. This comes after recent border clashes that killed at least 101 people. According to U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, India's trade deal with the United States stalled after Prime Minister Narendra Modi did not make a call to President Donald Trump to seal the agreement. leading to Washington doubling tariffs on Indian goods to 50%, including a 25% penalty over India's Russian oil purchases. US Vice President J.D. Vance urged Europe to take Donald Trump seriously on Greenland after Washington floated buying the Danish territory and did not rule out military action to secure it. Israel strikes has killed at least 13 Palestinians across the Gaza Strip on Thursday after the Israeli military said it targeted a site following a failed rocket launch, with medics reporting that 4 people, including children, were killed in a tent strike in Khan Yunis, while Hamas claims more than 1,100 Israeli ceasefire violations since October. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will visit Japan on Tuesday to meet Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi in Nara. The summit will include discussions and a dinner on regional and global issues. US President Donald Trump has said that he held a great meeting with Intel CEO Lip-Bu Tan, calling him very successful and praising the US government's 10% stake in the chipmaker. Intel shares has jumped in extended trading, up about 75% since the CHIPS Act investment. Now we have a breaking news. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has warned that the Islamic Republic will not tolerate mercenaries working on behalf of foreign powers. Khamenei has noted that some rioters are attempting to please US President Donald Trump by damaging public property and urged all Iranians to preserve national unity in the face of unrest. Khamenei has also addressed Trump directly, telling him to focus on the problems within his own country instead of interfering in Iran's internal affairs. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Sol Satka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Satka, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Now looking at this, why is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei so confidently framing unrest as the internal, of course, Iranian unrest as foreign-backed influence, and also whatever he has said towards U.S. President, that mind your own business kind of dialogue. How do you think U.S. will react, or do you think U.S. can completely ignore this?
Iran has no levers that it can pull against the USA. Iran spent 45 years building up proxy network to attack the West and cause the West problems. And that has unraveled over the past 2 years since one of its proxies, Hamas in Gaza, started a war that it then lost. And the entire thing gradually unraveled as Israel went through the process of picking it apart slowly, methodically, one by one, until this octopus of terror has been left without any of its legs. And so you have the head of the octopus sitting there with its bleeding tentacles in every direction, wailing at Trump. But Trump is in control of the largest military the world has ever seen. It has allies in the region, from Israel to the UAE to India, all of whom hate Iran. And Iran has no backers left. Russia, as we saw in June, was totally unable to come to Iran's aid. China is also unable to fundamentally help them, and certainly doesn't like getting involved in foreign conflicts. So Iran, the Iranian regime, is all alone. And the people that are rising up against the Iranians are not, as they pretend, Mossad agents or the CIA. Is in fact their own people. Because they were so intent on causing chaos around the region to bring about their crazed dreams of world domination for their sect. Not only have they poisoned their own people against their own religion, but they have failed to maintain basic sanitation, basic water. Iran was an advanced country when they took it over. It had a strong currency, it had universities, it was a serious place. And what's left after 47 years of misrule is corruption and chaos. They don't have any water to drink, nothing works, they don't have any power. The people go out into the streets to buy their daily groceries, and every day the money in their pocket is worth 10% less every single day. So the people are rising up. And unlike in previous rounds of protests that we've seen over the past 20 years, this isn't really a protest about religious strictures. So the Iranians can no longer say, oh, we're going to let you wear slightly less head covering, or we're going to let women do such and such as the demands come across. This time, it's simply the people don't have any food. And at the same time as the people don't have what to eat, the Iranian regime doesn't have what to offer them. They want nothing to offer. They tried a desperate plea to offer Iranian citizens who do not protest $7 a month. $7, which is, by the way, worth over 10 million Iranian riyals, and 10% less every day. That's really all they got left, to try and buy off the people, not to protest, not to rise up against them. Whether this round of protests worked is unclear. The Trump administration is playing a very clever game, which is what Khomeini is reacting to there. The Trump administration has recognized that the people are very likely to overthrow the regime. And the only way the regime can protect itself, as it has done in the past, is by shooting protesters en masse to scare the other ones away. And so the Trump regime has provided a dilemma to the regime. If they shoot the protesters, Trump has promised to intervene. If they don't shoot the protesters eventually will simply overrun all the headquarters of the regime. So they don't know what to do. They're in a quandary.
Thank you for highlighting that and joining us, Mr. Solsadka. Now we move on to Russia and Ukraine. Now, Russian drones have attacked targets in Kyiv, killing 4 people, injuring at least 19, and inflicting considerable damage on dwellings and infrastructure. Russia's defense ministry says that its forces struck strategic targets in a massive overnight strike over Ukraine using Oreshnik, hypersonic, and several other missiles. Kyiv has claimed that Russia launched 36 missiles, 242 drones. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha has confirmed that Kyiv is briefing the United States and European partners on the technical details of the strike involving the Oreshnik hypersonic intermediate-range ballistic missile. It has also stated that the strike took place close to EU borders and characterized the strike as a grave threat to European security and a test for the transatlantic community. Now we welcome Professor Veselin Popowski. He's a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School, joins us live from Bulgaria. Thank you very much, Professor Popowski, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, Russian drones have, and the Russia-Ukraine war has continued and even escalated now that we are seeing Russia has used their hypersonic missile towards Ukraine. So do you think that this situation is escalating further? Do you think US is still determined or motivated to intervene and push them towards ceasefire?
Hopefully so. Yes, you are right that there is escalation in the last 24 hours, especially with the hypersonic Oreshnik missiles. They produce mostly electricity cuts, not so much casualties, but a lot of people, over 1 million people, in fact, were left without electricity and heating for several hours. So effectively, Russia is trying to inflict as much damage and suffering for the Ukrainian people, but they are not able to do anything else. We see this like a last desperate attempts by Putin to inflict damage, but that with all those missiles and drones and attacks, the damage is quite limited. That means that Ukraine has already a significant air defense system. It will be more so that the big cities, but also any cities, will be protected quite well. So to minimize the damage, including casualties, this is basically what we hear from Zelenskyy, from his European partners, is that all the support that Ukraine needs should be given immediately, as soon as possible. As far as the United States administration, yes, we know the horrible position by Donald Trump on this. He didn't do anything over the last year. He's just talking and talking and not producing anything. he gave some ultimatums to Russia for ceasefire. He never followed up with any pressure on Vladimir Putin to accept those ceasefires. So the role of the United States and Donald Trump by himself has been reduced to a very minimum. He's not a player anymore in this, I think, unless there is a change in the attitude in Washington, in the White House. Is such change coming? Hopefully so. Everybody's hoping. Ukrainians is hoping that the US will finally support Ukraine properly and will put pressure on Russia severely so that this conflict can finally end. But again, the signals are very mixed as everything else. Donald Trump is erratic and chaotic. He says one thing one day, he says the other thing the other day. So the hopes are not very high that Washington will be a constructive player here.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. And Professor, please stay with us as we stay on this news. Now, Ukraine has dismissed Russia's latest attempt to justify the military strike, calling the allegation that Ukrainian forces attacked President Vladimir Putin's residence as absurd. Kyiv says the repeated claims are false and designed to provide Moscow with a pretext for ongoing aggression. Ukrainian officials insist that no such attack took place and warn that Russia is using fabricated accusations to justify their further military actions. The statement comes amid heightened tensions in the region, with Ukraine continuing to face attacks along its borders. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Veselin Popovsky, the professor and vice dean at Tyndall Global Law School, joins us live from Bulgaria. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. As now, you were just highlighting that U.S. says one thing, so one day one thing, another. One thing is clear here. I just wanted to bring our focus into the fact that the U.S.-Russia nuclear arms control treaty that's expiring soon. Do you think that expiring soon will change anything in U.S. enforcing this, or U.S. backing Ukraine further, or do you think this will escalate the nuclear arms race or nuclear arms control treaty expiring will further deteriorate the situation?
Well, it's a good question, and if you ask this question to the White House, they will not know anything about this. They are so incompetent that they don't know what expires when. So that's why it's difficult to answer. If you ask me what Donald Trump thinks, I think he doesn't know what does he thinks. So for that matter, it's very, very difficult to comment on that. But yes, the treaty expires. So how Russia will play with that? Possibly aggressively. They will again ask the White House for some concessions, for some understanding of their position, in exchange for prolonging the nuclear treaty. Maybe that will be the approach from Moscow. They will try to make more phone calls between Putin and Trump. They will try to explain their position, which is always a manipulation. It is always a lie. Like, as you said, the attack on the Putin residence was a fantasy, an imagination they used for their excuses again and again to bomb civilian targets. So Russia will continue to manipulate, and the incompetent US administration will continue to be a dog on the leash or a puppet of this manipulation. So that's it's not serious both sides, It's not serious on the Russian side because they are lying and manipulating. And obviously, Donald Trump is led by those manipulations, and he doesn't deliver what a normal president of the strongest military state in the world should do. So this kind of game, unfortunately, we will see for some time until there is some change, either in Moscow or in Washington, and hope such change will come one day. But yes, you're absolutely right. There is not much hope, and the expiry of a treaty will not change much, let's put it simply like this.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Veselin Popovsky for joining us today and sharing that insight with us on NewsX World. Now we move the focus on to US. Hundreds of protesters took to the streets outside a US Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility in Portland, Oregon, following a shooting involving a federal agent that left 2 people injured. A US Border Patrol agent shot and wounded a man and a woman in Portland, leading city and state officials to call for calm. This came after public outrage over the ICE shooting and death of the Minnesota woman a day earlier. Tensions over US President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown rose across the country after the second shooting involving immigration officers in 2 days. The shootings deepened rifts between state and federal officials over how and why the shooting occurred. In both the Minneapolis and Portland shootings, U.S. officials contend that they were part of an increasing trend of criminal suspects and anti-Trump activists using their cars as weapons. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Sol Sadka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Sol, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, what do you think what exactly is happening as we see similar kind of incidents with federal law enforcement agencies versus state, and also we see that the shootings happening from ICE or towards from ICE agents has been like a reoccurring thing.
The level of gun violence in the USA is quite extreme. If I recall, there's over 20,000 gun-related deaths every year. Many of them, I forget a small percentage, but still many, involving police and law enforcement, as would be expected. Because wherever you have crime and you have armed police, you're going to have reactions and ultimately deaths. But whether this is this one case, of which there are multiple every day, has caught public attention, is unclear why this particular one has caught public attention. But obviously there are many of these cases every week and even every day. So it's neither unusual nor surprising that this kind of thing will happen. The details of the case are hazy. Many people are defending the officer, other people are attacking him. No doubt it will all be investigated, and if he is guilty, he will serve time in jail.
How do you think, how might this shooting affect the political or debate over federal and immigration enforcement in Democrat-led states?
It's unknowable exactly what difference it will make. The ultimate responsibility for immigration into the United States is at the federal level. The state level can make certain accommodations for immigrants to the United States. They can make cities sanctuary cities where they try to prevent the enforcement of federal laws. That probably won't work well under the Trump administration, because the federal government can retaliate with funding cuts and all sorts of penalties that will make the lives of the mayors and state governors difficult.
Right. And what do these growing tensions between state and federal officials reveals about the challenges faced by Trump's administration of enforcing immigration policy?
The immigration policy, to enforce immigration policy on the federal level, is quite straightforward, seeing as the United States has easily defendable and quite well defended borders. Although over the past couple of years, the enforcement was quite lax. That can easily be remedied overnight almost, and it is being remedied. The issue is more of the some tens of millions of foreign residents, immigrants, refugees who are already inside the United States. And over that, there is considerable political debate on both sides of the spectrum. Even if people might be opposed to immigration, they often are not in favor of removing people who are already inside the United States, because after all, they are often their personal friends, their gardeners, their cleaners, their staff, even their bosses, because some people have been there for many years.
Yes, and since we know this, what happened in the past 48 hours in Minnesota and Portland, both these cities are very multicultural. So in what ways could this public perception of law enforcement be shaped by clashes between federal agents and communities with a history of political dissent in both these cities?
Yeah, I would counsel, if I was advising people on the far left in the United States, the kind of people that led the Black Lives Matter movement, if I were counseling them, I would very much advise them not to make this issue into another Black Lives Matter movement, because the American right, the Trump administration in particular, would absolutely love that. It would lead to their resounding re-election. There are midterm elections coming up in about 10 months. And if there was another BLM movement because of this kind of thing, that would galvanize the right and centrists against them, and that would mean that the Democrat Party would lose in a very big way in 10 months' time.
What do you think, lastly, what do you think, can Trump do to, kind of gain more support in these cities? Because it seems like right now it's just crippling.
Oh, no, I don't think so at all. On the contrary, when you see these, protests, that kind of thing, these are very minor. On a national scale, you're talking about a country with 350 million people and a third of global GDP. So the fact that there are a couple of protests in the center of some cities, where in any case, most people do not live or work, is not making any difference to America's GDP or tax revenue. It's really just for the TV screens. It would have to grow to vastly higher levels before it made any kind of impact on Trump's thinking. And like I said, Trump would love nothing more than to be able to present himself as the man who was fighting far left Antifa protesters, standing up against them, because they are almost universally unpopular. And with the way the American politics works, the critical thing is to present yourself as a centrist. To win, you have to present yourself as more of a centrist than your opponent. And the Antifa people are very far on the left. And so this would all make it extremely easy for Trump to do exactly that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sadka, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we move on to our next news. Now we move the focus on to Israel. The Israeli military and Shin Bet has said that they carried out strikes in northern and southern Gaza in response to a rocket launched from Gaza City that fell short of Israel. In a statement, the IDF has said the strikes targeted Hamas operatives and terror infrastructure, including rocket launch shafts. Israeli officials say the rocket fire was clear violation of the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Gaza Civil Defense Agency has reported that Israeli strikes killed at least 13 people, including 4 children. The latest exchange underscores growing strains on the fragile ceasefire. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Sol Sadka. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Mr. Sadka, for staying with us. What more can you tell us about this escalating tensions between Israel and Hamas and in Gaza?
Look, the ceasefire is a ceasefire in name only. The Hamas operatives that remain in the 40% of Gaza that they still control, most of it rubble, have had already a few months under which they were obligated to return the final body of the final hostage they are holding and completely disarm themselves. And they have done either. And they have no intention of doing either. As a result, Israel is simply entrenching itself in the 60% of Gaza that it controls and delineating what is effectively a border. And there is really no prospect of that changing in the near future. The cleanup of Gaza will never begin until Hamas are no longer there, because there's no international group, body, agency at all who will be willing to, or even allowed to, supply any kind of funds, any kind of cash for the rebuilding of Gaza while Hamas is still there. Because everyone knows that if that happens, they will simply return to building tunnels and rockets and all that stuff. So the ceasefire continues to Israel's benefit. Hamas are virtually disarmed. They are virtually harmless to the Israeli population. And a skeleton force of perhaps 10,000 Israeli soldiers is surrounding them and pinning them down. And Israel is entirely capable of doing that in perpetuity, just by using its standing army based on conscription.
Right. And can we still say, building on your answer, can we still say that the ceasefire is holding and phase 2 should be implemented?
The ceasefire, as far as Israel is concerned, is implemented. They did what they were supposed to do. The ball is now in the court of Hamas to hand over all their weapons and leave. But they're not going to do that. That will never happen. It was always obvious that was never going to happen. So the main goal of the ceasefire was to bring the war to a kind of frozen state and get all the hostages out. And that worked out for Israel very well. It worked out for Hamas's former sponsors in Qatar and Turkey, who recognized that the game was up for them, and it was simply causing them reputational damage. But Hamas is not going to leave. Hamas are crazed jihadis. They want to die rather than surrender. And the people who live under them, some 1.5 to 2 million people at this point, are suffering very greatly. They are being allowed to leave as they get visas through various means. And it's very sad for everyone involved, but there's no prospect, if this continues, of Gaza getting rebuilt in the next decades.
With that, I would like to thank Mr. Solsadka for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move the focus on to South America. Venezuela has released 5 Spanish citizens from prison, including prominent rights activist Rocio San Miguel, who had been detained since February of 2024. Spanish authorities have confirmed that Andres Martinez, Jose Maria Basoa, and Ernesto Gorbe and Miguel Moreno were also freed. The Spanish government has called the move a positive step, but local rights groups say the promised release of Venezuelan political prisoners has not yet been carried out. Families waiting outside detention centers report ongoing uncertainty about the actual releases. The prisoner frees come amid political turmoil in Caracas following the ouster of President Nicolas Maduro, the swearing of interim President Delcy Rodriguez, and the U.S. announcement that it would refine and sell millions of barrels of Venezuelan crude oil. Rights group Foro Penal estimates that more than 800 political prisoners remain in Venezuela, including at least 86 foreign nationals. Now we move on to tech news. Italy's Data Protection Authority has issued a warning over artificial intelligence tools, including Elon Musk's chatbot Grok, citing the risk of generating deep-fake images without consent. The regulator has said that AI platforms that manipulate real images or voices, including tools that digitally undress people, could lead to serious privacy violations and criminal offenses under EU law. Italian officials are working with Ireland's Data Protection Commission, the EU's lead privacy regulator for X, and say further action may follow. The warning comes as European policymakers push for tougher enforcement of data protection and digital services rules. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. President Donald Trump has said that he expects to meet Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado. Meanwhile, interim leader Delcy Rodriguez rejected Trump's claim of U.S. control, insisting Venezuela remains sovereign. According to Ukrainian officials, Russian drone strikes have hit Kyiv just before midnight of Friday, killing 4 people, including an emergency medic, and injuring at least 19 people, with 14 hospitalized. Military administration head reports buildings and critical infrastructure were damaged as well. 3 people are unaccounted for as bushfires rage across Australia's state of Victoria, with firefighters battling 30 active blazes under a catastrophic fire danger rating. Premier Jacinta Allen has warned of one of the state's most dangerous fire days in years. US Vice President J.D. Vance has urged Europe to take Donald Trump seriously on Greenland after Washington floated buying the Danish territory and did not rule out military action to secure it. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung will visit Japan on Tuesday to meet Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi in Nara. The summit will include discussions and dinner on regional global issues.